I will start with, this morning we posted our action armor drill in high school. You guys seen the signs out. Press release attached. Heads of St. Mary's Valley School District and some staff, and had a lot of good conversations, good learning points. So, and God forbid a big event ever happens here, we're a little bit more prepared. So it was a good training process. Everything in town is going pretty smooth. It's call load's kind of slowing down. The parks are good. We're coming in right just under the budget with our extra duty. So by the time we finalize through December, we'll be kind of right at the max. So everything is good there. And putting the final touches on my IAP for the Parade of Lights coming up. That'll be our next big thing and last big thing of the year. And then we have our new shift bids for the Sheriff's Office are set, but our district bids are not. So in the next couple weeks, we'll know, starting in January 25th of next year, who will be assigned where. So a lot of times we get new night shift deputies at that point. So the day shift guys are pretty senior, so Gary and Steve definitely have enough seniority to stay up here through the day. So once that happens, I'll try to get those guys into a board meeting so that we can put a name to it.
Great.
That's all I have.
As long as you're not going anywhere.
I'm not going
All
anywhere.
right.
Thanks for the vote of confidence.
Any other questions for the cert? Okay, thank you very much. Turn it over for staff reports.
It's on. It's on. It's already on. Yeah. Well, it looks like the vehicle is anything else we need to do. Oh, there it goes. Oh,
Thank you.
there you go. Hey,
There it is. Well, this is the unaudited revenues and expenditures for the month of October. And as you can see, everybody is, revenues were higher than expenditures. And I know with the water and sanitation, they kind of look funny just because we had recorded some reimbursement for the plan. We put it in the grant fund, but we reclassify it to each of the appropriate funds for the water and sanitation, so that's why it looks kind of funky. But, you know, they have their regular operating expenses, but then doing that reimbursement, it looked that way. But, you know, even the general fund is like really close, but, you know, it's about the expenditures. And this one, just to give you a picture of the year to date, and again, revenues and expenditures, again, they all look like they're higher except for the sanitation fund. And I just put an explanation on your notes on that overview, you know, what some of the reasons why they were so high. Let me see my notes here. So the outside professional services fees showing 140,000. Maintenance supplies 9,000 under treatment, capital purchases 24,000, and the land purchase of 56,000 under capital outlay. And then it has the wastewater treatment plan, the loan principal 121,000 plus the interest of 28 under debt. And then some of the expenditures over budget are chemicals, lab and lab supplies of 32,000. The sludge disposal 62 under the treatment, and just to remind you again, the sanitation fund was budgeted at a loss of 695,000, and at the end of October is 302,000, which is 43.4% of the budget. So that's the truth on that. And then this one just give you. And I got rid of this, I skipped those two slides where we, you know, put in the budget until we have all the 3 months, October, November, December, then we can look at those in January. So here, just the general fund, just to give you an idea how it was looking, the first, the second, third, the fourth quarter. So again, we just have for the fourth quarter just that 1 month of October. And for the electric fund, you know, it kind of looks, you know, now that we're looking at it on a quarterly basis, you know, that they're pretty close, you know, to their revenues and even some of the expenditures. And here's just the water fund. Again, it just kind of looks kind of wacky, you know, on the expense side for the quarter just because of that reclassification. And then the same thing with the sanitation, but, you know, sanitation, the third quarter, like, looks pretty high. And here's the stormwater, a lot of money, not a lot of expenses.
Yet.
Yet. And then the parks and rec fund. So, just for the month of October, you know, they had 62,000 and 37,000 in expenses, so. And I think that's all. It's kind of shorter now, compared now as we get rid of the other two screens. Do you had any questions about it?
Do you have the, oh, I'm sorry.
No, go ahead. Ms. Newell.
Do you have the sales tax slide?
Make sure you're talking into the mic.
Oh, the other one, you can try the other, oh.
I'm all confused now.
No, I don't have it with me, sorry.
The sales tax, I can get it real quickly.
Yeah, well, so I'm still a little confused. So the numbers at the top reflect the right month, but then the chart at the bottom, it's actually, I think, the September sales that are being reflected in that October.
Yeah, it's like always kind of, we're like 2 months behind on the sales tax.
Right, I totally understand that, but I think the chart doesn't coincide with the numbers.
Okay.
So I think it just needs to be shifted back a month, if that makes sense. Do you guys see that when you're looking at sales tax? I don't even have it, but- So.
Let's see if I can get a hard
So,
copy.
Thank you. I was not prepared for my question.
Sales tax.
So, for example, oh, yours doesn't do that. The, in the chart with the numbers up above,
Yes.
there is no figure under 2018 for the sales month October. But in the bar graph on the bottom, there is a line for 2018.
Oh, because.
And I
like-
think that's really September's bar.
And I know this makes it really confusing to me, to myself too, because you see like where it says collection month, it says October, and that's where I updated the numbers. So I see sales month September, and then it says collection month in October. So we received those in October, but it's saying that it was for the sales month of September.
So then the bar graph
It's showing
is
October.
the collection month, it's
Yes.
not the sales
Yes,
month.
that's correct.
Okay, I think it would be more clear what our sales look like if the bar graph also
Yes.
represented the sales
sales
month
month
and
and
not
not
the
the-
collection month. I don't know how you all feel about that.
when can you recognize it as revenue?
Well, for us, when we receive them, in our case, because we're statutory, yeah.
I see what you're saying.
I'm saying, yeah,
Yeah.
I think that's
I
why
think
it
that's
is this
why-
way, because I've always wondered that too. I'm like, it'd really be nice to see it in the month it was
Mhm.
generated,
Mhm.
but
Yeah.
I've had to get used to that, the way towns.
I can see it in the number though,
Yeah.
so it's not
Right.
like it's not there.
Right,
Yeah,
right.
so I can live with that. I didn't think
It's like,
about it.
for a home rule, you know, they will collect on the 20th of the following month. So if it's September, they will recognize it when they receive it, so the same thing. But it's just for us, kind of delaying a little bit until later.
Yeah, that helps, thank you.
Any other questions? Trustee
One.
Brown?
I guess combination comment question on long as we're on the sales tax chart. It looks like to me that if we just equal the sales taxes for the last 2 months of the year, that we're gonna be about $176,000 over projections for sales tax for the
Already
year.
saw that, yes.
Okay.
Even
That
though,
relates to something in the budget that I'll get to do, and I
yeah,
want to see if that number was right
and even
first.
here, there might be some, doing some deferrals or accruals at the end of the year, just because sometimes, like for your beginning, there might be something that I need to reverse for January, but also on the end of 2018, we're recognized as until we get it January and February, we'll have the full year of 2018. Yeah, so it's kind of,
If that figure was right, we'll come back later during the budget discussion. I just wanted to make sure while I was on this chart if that was right. Okay, thanks.
I just comment on the electric fund. It looks like it's, not too bad. We have the $300,000 meter expenditure, and none of it is expended yet. And so the question is, are we going to expend that this year? I've heard a couple of times that we were,
yeah.
but if we do, then it's going to turn the bottom line negative. Not terribly negative, but a little bit.
It will be within that 639, is that the loss, 695 that was budgeted? You see, like, on the electric, was that
Go back to the.
Or I'm looking at the wrong one? No, that was the sanitation.
Yeah.
Yeah, you're right, you're right.
It is on the agenda for next agenda.
Well, and to that question though, are the graphs operating expenses or do they include the CIP?
Everything.
It is
Everything.
So if we only had operating, it would look different once the.
I think it's good to show everything, but I just wasn't, I hadn't noticed that.
What if we should add a dotted line to the everything to show operating? Mhm.
The graphs are
Can you make
getting
it
more
up?
and more
We
complex.
can make it
It's
happen.
good though, it's good. It shows we understand our financials better than we did in the past. Go ahead, trustee Carey.
I was just gonna follow Pro Tem Drystad's question on the meters. That 300,000, have we purchased all those meters yet?
No.
So when that money is expended, it becomes an expense, but our balance sheet will then show those meters as assets, correct?
Yes.
They'll
That's
become,
true.
they'll become
Yes, that's
assets.
true.
Okay.
Yeah. And so we, since we're talking about that, we did hold the pre-bid meeting last week on the electric meter, or the water meter installation. Wait, electric meter installation. And we did express to them that we really needed to have that funding, we need to be able to show that purchase in 2018. And so they all said there's about a 6 to 8 week ordering time on the meters. But because we have what is called month 13 and month 14 in our budget to be able to allow for purchases in that time frame to still be charged in 2018, we will be fine. But we are expecting it. Originally, we had December 3rd at their pre-bid meeting. They all said with the holiday, that's not enough time. So they did request, could we go to the 17th? And at this point, it doesn't really matter if we know the meters aren't going to be here until January. So it'll probably be the 17th. But some really great add-ons to those meters that will really give us really good data. And we can even install extra data they can collect from some of the other utilities as well on that same meter. So we're excited about it.
So I just had one comment, and mostly I just want to commend the staff on what is looking to be a really strong financial year. The town has had a really good performance, even though sanitation needs some attention, which we'll be getting later tonight. I think overall, I just want to say, nice job. I mean, on the year that the town's finishing ahead of budget in revenue and under budget in most categories on expenses. So we've really been able to improve our reserves and the funds in most of them. And so that's great. That's not always the situation with staff. So
Thank you.
I just want to say nice job.
Anna, you had a couple other financial
Oh,
updates. Thanks. Keep her packet together.
Yeah, I just want to let you know that we had an RFQ for the audit assistance, just to plan ahead for next year. We need that assistance, so it's already on the Rocky Mountain e-bids. And it went out on Tuesday, November 6th, and the bids are due on Tuesday, November 27th at 3 p.m.
So if the budget's adopted, you'll be ready.
Yes. And then, just to share with you with the cash needs, you know, our operating account is kind of dwindling down. And so what I did was just ask the grants staff for a dollar amount of what we need to cover at the end of December 31st. So we had we will need around $1.2 million for just the flood recovery. And then we have additional to cover our payroll, insurance, all those day-to-day expenses. So I will be asking if you can approve for us to transfer $2 million from our Caller Trust investment account into the operating account to cover those expenses.
We don't really even have to request. It's just, as we've explained before, our Bank of the West account is kind of like our checking account. And then we have Colorado Trust, which is more like a savings account. And as we are entering that phase, and we're going to be talking about that, actually we have it on the December 17th agenda, to start talking about what cash flow will look like this last year of recovery. We are going to hit some very low points. And so because the money has to be spent up front, and then we have to wait for that reimbursement, we're just at that point that we think we have $2 million of expenses between now and the end of December, and the Colorado Trust account, or the Bank of the West account has $700,000 in it. So we're gonna have to make one of those transfers, which we rarely have ever had to do, but it is just a reality check again that we will be doing that several times throughout 2019. But it's not a position either one of us, like to be in, but we will be having to make those transfers, I would guess probably for at least every other month or every quarter in 2019. And our account will be getting very, very low, both accounts, as we head toward that final flood recovery cross line, because they're holding 10% of every project. So when you have $60 million, that's a chunk of money. And those sorts of things won't be coming back to us till at the very, very end.
Mayor Pro Tem.
So is that withhold, is that what makes up the bulk of the over 120-day
No,
$1 million?
that is still reimbursements for projects. And what impacts that the most is the projects that are in the pilot program, which is all of the parks and the wastewater treatment plant are in one project. Until you can close out all of them, they're holding all that reimbursement. And so until we get our last park done, they'll just be holding it. So there may be points, and that's why we want to have a separate workshop on this in December. There may be a point where we will either have to find a line of credit or go back to the state and request some additional just cash up front, or we'll have to slow down. They'll either have to speed up reimbursements or we're going to have to ask for an extension on projects. But this is just one of those reality checks of recovery that is uncomfortable toward the end. But we feel very, very confident about our reimbursement and being reimbursed. I know there's been lots of articles lately in the paper about Boulder County and Larimer County. We are not in that situation. We have actually a very small percentage of our projects that have not met that threshold of being reimbursed compared to the two counties. So no, it's going to be a cash flow. What's the right word?
Challenge.
It's going to be very jungle.
Challenge.
Oh, challenge as we go into 2019. But it's not due to lack of funds or anything like that. It's simply the timing on reimbursement. If you recall, we had 3 big projects that were supposed to be done in 2018 that weren't. And so now all of those will be in 2019. and it's just gonna really be a cash flow crunch. The delay of Bone Park Phase 2, the delay, that short delay at the ponds, and there's one more. Oh, the whole big trail project in Eastern Corridor. So all of those were projects that should have been completed in 2018 that now will have to, Anna's best estimate, the grant managers today, is we have about $15,500,000 to spend in 2019. And there's $8 million in the bank account. So it is this very challenging situation of getting a project, getting it refunded before we commit to others. So nothing new to the staff, it's just gonna be it's gonna be a little more frightening when it's actually affecting town money during that last year. So we're planning December 17th to have that discussion with you, because we're hoping to find out before then on like the Second Avenue Bridge and the pedestrian bridge and some of those projects that will determine our
Do we need to invite anyone from the state to that workshop?
It may
Would it
not
be
hurt.
helpful for them to hear the discussion like we did when we ran into
Sure.
this a couple of years ago?
Sure, and if not, maybe even just DOLA and a official from the state. But it's definitely going to, the timing of recovery has just shifted a little bit into 2019. And so just different cash flow challenges.
Any questions?
I have a quick question. On the cash on hand, or cash position, the express bill pay account
Yes.
holding the 75,000. In our audit in June, they talked about transferring some of that out of there. Where is it actually sitting? Is it actually in our general fund account, that 75, and you just have it separated out because that's what's come in from the express?
Yeah, like express bill will hold it, and then I'll do it when I'm reconciling every month. I will transfer the whole balance for that month.
Okay.
And then whatever between the time, you know, the 1st and the 10th, when I'm doing that bank reconciliation, is when I transfer it. So there's always a little bit more in the account, but we recognize here what we actually have and have transferred to our bank account.
Okay,
Yeah.
thank you.
Okay, that's all the finance update.
And the third one about
Which one?
about the refunding, that was the only item that I had listed also there. You know, we have the opportunity to have some savings on that,
Refinance.
the fund, electric fund. So that's what it would promise, 29,000. So there were some calculations of how much we're paying in interest towards what they're offering, 3.1 interest rate. So that was what they're showing, 29,000. So recommending if we can go with Victra and do that. For that fund.
Thank you.
On other just administrative report, I want to touch on a couple of things. These were in your packet, so if you have questions, let me know, otherwise I'll just run through them really quickly. Parks and Rec Commission had a discussion about the Lions outdoor games after hearing your discussion from the workshop last time. And so they would like to see some of the same changes that you as a board have discussed. Making it again more family and kid friendly, less emphasis on the beer, and using Lions Valley River Park more if possible this coming year or the next year. Boulder County Open Space annually puts out a request for open space and trail prioritization, and that was in your packet. I don't know if anyone has any opinions or if they're okay with the prioritization as the Parks and Rec Commission presented.
I did a question, and kind of a comment about that. The top 5 rankings, the top 3 were with respect to trails that, if they're gonna happen, are not gonna happen anytime soon, including the problems that we had with the Islands Ditch and not being able to do our trail. And the 2 other trails there seem like to me things that are dependent on Longmont or Boulder County in the distant future. Number 4 they had as a Lions to Rabbit Mountain Trail, and number 5 a Lions to Hall Ranch Trail. I was kind of curious about the ranking there because, I mean, it seems to me Hall Ranch is way closer than Rabbit Mountain. And there's at least a chance, if we can figure out the connecting to, connect our Howell Ranch, Bone Park, and Hall Ranch into a integrated trail system at some point. It seems like to me that that was possibly more doable than the other 4 ranked above it. And, that's just an observation. I guess parks people have looked at that, but it's kind of my opinion with that. In terms of what could we get done in the foreseeable future, it seemed to me like the connection to Hall Ranch might belong higher.
Higher than Rabbit Mountain and St. Green, or actually up to number 1 or number 2?
I don't really know the purpose. To me, the first 3, just, I don't know when they're gonna happen, but they're not gonna happen
Well, this is, yeah.
anytime soon.
They're all part of a regional
And
system.
to me, Hall Ranch is way closer than Rabbit Mountain, and they're probably, and especially if Boulder County, as they've now gotten started on Hall Ranch Phase 2, the old Hampshire, if they follow through with that and get the road completed and open up Phase 2 of Hall Ranch, it's a much bigger, much more attractive place to visit than Rabbit Mountain is from Lyons, I would think. That's just my
I can take that back
observation
to.
from occasionally trying to run part of it.
The ecology board would concur with
Okay.
Trustee Browning. Connecting the current trailhead right down here, getting Boulder County to open up the space right up here, and members of the ecology board who have worked with Boulder County, Jefferson County. Boulder County builds switchbacks very, very well compared to Jefferson County and other counties. And going straight up and getting people off Highway 7, connecting Hall Ranch would be a high on their priority list also.
So actually on this trail list, number 5 and number 7 are probably higher priority than the others. And it might be good timing to put that because as you guys know, CDOT will be doing some significant work on Highway 7. So maybe there might be some opportunities for funding to actually make that happen. Because this list has been around for a long time. And if the board concurs, we can change our order.
I guess my only question is, because the others are already part of a plan that's been approved by the county, I mean, I kind of feel like that's why they tend to be keeping at the top to let the county know we're still
Part of the regional.
wanting to be
yeah.
part of that regional plan. I mean, I don't know, how much does the rank order really impede us from still doing one of these things? I mean, I think the Boulder County plan really is to look at this kind of big picture regional connectivity to things that are already, have gone through a planning process, I guess is the best way to say it. So does it matter really that much what way we get things?
I wasn't involved in discussions. I don't think you were at that meeting the night they did it.
No, I wasn't
Yeah.
able to go.
So I don't really know if it is ranking or if it's just a list. So I'll confirm that and give that feedback back to Director Cosgrove and get that changed around. If there is a ranking, maybe we can even better identify what, the regional the priorities are and then local. Maybe there's a way to do that a little more.
And they might all be part of the plan already too. I think
Sure.
even the Hall Ranch, I'm not sure if there is an actual plan for that or if that's something they're thinking about.
I think there is
I can't remember.
I
if
think
they
there
added
is
that
a-
one. Okay, I know there's been talk of the Rabbit Mountain as well. But yeah, I think number 6 is something we really have control over locally. Highway 7,
So 5, 6, and 7.
yeah. So I don't know, it depends on how we're supposed to look
Well,
at
and
this,
now
because
the
I see
last
some
one.
things that are like,
Now the last one is actually
Yeah.
a possible reality too. So maybe I'll see if we can divide this up a little further into local and regional.
yeah, it's more, are we asking them for something we want them to do, or is
Yeah.
it like
Just
what we
our
want
list.
to do? So I guess it depends on how you're looking
Okay,
at the list.
let me follow up on that a little bit more. I included the cover sheet from a recent CDBG DR monitoring visit that was held in June. And I included only the cover sheet because what you find when you open this report, I just want to give the board kind of a perspective of these monitoring visits. 83 pages on CDBG monitoring to this point, the survey that they did. And I just want to reiterate that their overall observations were that the monitoring team was very pleased with the Town of Lyons' attention to detail and project documentation contained in the Salesforce system, which is our system of record. as well as the town's efforts to instill policies and best practices for federal awards, albeit never using federal funding prior to this disaster. We have expended almost $2 million of DR funding on the buyout project to date, and it was able to serve 1 low to moderate income household, 2 urgent need households, and 19 mobile park tenants that needed relocation assistance. And so out of the entire survey they did, 83 pages, there were only 2 findings and 1 recommendation. One of the findings being that they wanted to see the town administrator bonded, as well as the treasurer and the clerk. So we took care of that today. And then there was a recommendation on establishing a policy for advance funding. So we'll take care of that as well. So overall, a really successful visit. And I think that we are definitely ahead of the game compared to others. I had a phone call from Colorado Springs Press asking, why aren't there buyouts happening? And how did you guys do it? So, you know, it's always fun when it's not fun, but it's always nice when a small town can be staying right up there with the best of them. So, we did get awarded the $15,000 of our sustainability grant that you guys considered recently, and so now it will be going towards several projects instead of toward the grant coordinator. If you recall that, we put the grant coordinator in our budget. We do have a request for qualifications out there for some engineering services, so I want you to know that. So we'll be looking for additional engineering assistance in 2019. There is some potential for some more CDBG DR funding via the Boulder County Collaborative with some of the other communities that are returning funds left over from projects that have been completed. So we did put together our unmet needs list, updated our unmet needs list. And if we were to do our entire storm drainage plan, which is all considered unmet needs, and all the other projects identified in our unmet needs, it's like still $67 million of improvements our community could use for flood mitigation. At this point, we're looking at maybe another potential $2 million to come to us, and they would not expect it to be expended till September 2020, this extra dollar. So that would be awesome, to get another $2 million to use toward prevention, flood damage prevention. So that's excellent. And then as well as the DR monitoring visit, we also had a HMGP, which is the FEMA arm of hazard mitigation. They conducted their annual monitoring visit of the 28 buyout properties, and noted no issues with the current usage of any of the lots. So they were pleased as well. So, and then the last thing is we're winding up, trying to wind up our CRSA excess coverage. So our insurance is covered by CRSA, and when we exceeded, what was it, $5 million? Mm-hmm. When we exceeded $5 million of claims, it went over to their excess carrier. We are still going through all sorts of claims. We sat down with them and tried to give them a good understanding that they have a hard time understanding why we're not closing out all these projects 5 years later. And so we had a good discussion with them, and I think they're going to probably give us one more extension to the point where our public works building is built and fully furnished again with the equipment we've never replaced after the flood. So we don't have that yet, but it was a positive meeting, and I'm hopeful they're going to give us one more extension. Otherwise, we will have to buy things now and store them somewhere. And then lastly, I did include the 2018 year-end water report. This is something that I think traditionally the board has not really had a lot of exposure to, but I want you to start having that because we're going to have some water discussions coming up. This is a report that we submit every November because the water year is November 1st through October 31st. It basically says how many taps we have, how many more we're expecting to add next year, what was our average gallons used of water per day, what was our maximum day, which I found interesting this year. Our maximum day was October 14th, which I think was the Colorado Kite Festival.
Oh, it's not related to that, but.
Yeah, but I mean, that was kind of odd of all the days. That was our high day. Usually it's in the middle of, usually it's like August, a hot summer day. But we used, our highest day of usage was 721,000 gallons on October 14th. And then per our agreement with Longmont, we will have to negotiate a new contract if we ever exceed 1,310 taps. We're currently at 927, so I think we're okay for a while. And so it's just kind of a water report. We can have a different training on that sometime if you'd like to get more familiarized with the terms used in it, but just to let you know kind of where we're sitting with Longmont in regard to water.
All right, any questions on the administrator report? All right, thank you very much. We'll go on to audience business. This is the portion of the meeting where the public is welcome to address the board on items that are not on tonight's, excuse me, not on tonight's agenda as a public hearing. We do have 7 public hearings on tonight's agenda. The public hearings are related to ordinance 1042, which is increasing residential service rates. Public hearing ordinance 1045, which is related to charges for creating high strength surcharges. Public hearing ordinance 1046, which is related to other miscellaneous amendments to the wastewater utility service. And then we have 4 public hearings related to the budget. So if you're here for any of those items, please wait until those public hearings come up and make your comments. Otherwise, you may come up at this time for other topics, and each person will have 4 minutes. Please give your name and address for the record.
So it is just going over the budget general. I didn't read what the budget ordinances are, so I wouldn't come up and talk.
If it's budget related at all, I think you can wait and we'll call you. Any other folks here to speak? Oh.
Hi, I'm Laverne Johnson, 306 Evans, and I want to bring some Christmas cheer to all of you after a dreary year and invite you to our Christmas weekend next week. There's a bazaar on December 1st and 2nd, and then the big Christmas parade. And so Rocky Mountain Christmas is a theme, and they're taking applications. And followed by the choir at the Raul Vasquez stage. The parade starts at 6. And then fireworks, and then they'll have the parade awards. So it'll be a great day. The River Church is serving cocoa and cookies and giving the donation to the Historical Society, which really saves us a lot of hard work. And then we, the Historical Society, have a bake sale at the Visitor Center. And we'll be at the bazaar. They have 60 vendors. And the town is in charge of that. And we found that each of us have to get our own sales tax license. And this is the first year, so they're going to be swamped with 60 inquiries for license, so that's something new. So anyhow, happy holidays.
Hi, good evening. My name is Paul Friday. I'm a resident of Lyons, probably one of the few true natives still here. My own Western Stone Company, I've owned it for 18 years, just down the east corridor next to Clark's Hardware. I've leased a property from Lyons for 16 years now, and I put a building on that property. It's a nice steel building, and and signed a lease with the town that if the lease was ever to discontinue, that I would remove the building and restore the property back to what it originally was. The town assured me that there was not a problem, that the lease would continue. When the September 1st was when the lease was to renew. I talked with the town about the trail on the south side of it. I've talked to several representatives showing where the trail would line up. They expressed to me how it would intrude on the property coming in, which was not a problem. They were very kind, working with us, other businesses as well, as running the trail down through. Then I got information from the town that the trail was going to stop, or they had some kind of issues with this Highland ditch. 1 month later, this is, I was waiting for an update on the lease that was going to add the trail to it. And I hadn't seen it. I've talked to the town. It hadn't come. So another month went by, and I was contacted by Victoria about the possibility of looking to lease my building to another business that was in town that was getting ready to leave because they couldn't find the appropriate space. I entertained that, and I talked to a gentleman named Kelly with Green Glue, and met with him and Victoria to show them the building to see if it'd be something that would fit them if they needed it. They were kind of in desperate straits to try to keep the production in Lions. Kelly said it looks like it would be a good fit, and talking with Victoria, that the only downside was that the lease would have to have a sublet clause written into it. So I could go ahead and lease it to him. Met with Kelly another time after this, and Kelly explained to me that Longmont might be a better fit for them for one reason or another. Because of their growth, I don't know what might be the cause. I was called into town with Victoria the next day, expecting to pick up the lease with this sublet clause in it. To my surprise, she informed me that the town wasn't interested or going to renew my lease, and in fact, I would have 14 days to remove my building and all of the stone on my property to relinquish the property back to the town. I had given a check to the town. They held the check. They returned it back to me at that time. The next day, when I returned from lunch, the town attorney had posted a notice on my door expressing that I should cease and desist and release the property back to the town. And I've leased this property for 16 years, never had a problem, always paid on time. But this was never spoke to me, and all the time I was waiting for the lease, that this was even coming down the pipeline. I was always led to believe that this was a no-brainer. The town was working with me. You know, the lease is fine. It's going to continue like always. It dearly affects my business, but on the other hand, if the town feels that it needs to relinquish that lease and get the property back, I don't have a problem with that. I only ask the board, consider 14 days is utterly ridiculous to remove a building and restore the property to what it was, especially in the middle of winter. The more appropriate thing and the right thing to do, if the town wants to properly possess the property, as it gives me ample time to just erect the building and to clean up the property, because it's going to take quite a bit of heavy equipment, disconnect utilities that are tied to the city of Longmont. There's other options that I'm willing to offer to the town to entertain. I had talked with Parks and Rec. They were interested in a building as well earlier in the year, but no one ever got back to me about it.
So we're kind of at the 4-minute time. I don't know if it's possible.
I got this down to 4 minutes, so.
We've already exceeded the 4 minutes.
I'm just about finished. I was just going to offer the options to the town.
Okay.
Options one is that the town grant me to the end of September of next year to remove all the materials and recover the property back to what the town started leasing it to me, which is a reasonable amount of town in the middle of winter. Option two, I would offer the building to sell to the town and grant access across my property so the town could get to the building. which might help out the town in its need of a building. And I had an estimate brought up to me for $400,000 for that building and access easements. The final option is I have a property that's 5/8 of an acre adjacent to that property with a 1,800 square foot home on it, which is completely redone. And I'd be willing to sell the house, the building, and all the property rights to the town for $1.25 million. If this is something the town would entertain. I don't know what your budgets are like. I didn't think you had money, but.
Okay. Thank you for
Yeah.
presenting options without asking you to follow up with the town administrator
Okay.
and talk about whether the town wants to pursue any of this.
Okay, well, I appreciate your consideration for this and getting back to me.
Thank you very much.
All right?
Anyone else for audience business? Okay, we'll close audience business and we'll go ahead and invite the SFC to come up and give us an update on the single hauler ordinance. All right, take it away.
Yes.
Go ahead.
Hi, I'm Toby Russell. I am a Sustainability Coordinator, part-time staff member. For the purposes of this update, I am speaking on behalf of the SFC. Victoria stole my thunder. I wanted to announce that Boulder County did award the grant for Sustainability Matching Grant for next year. As she mentioned, it's going to go towards other projects, including part of the Sustainability Coordinator's salary, yard waste pickups periodically throughout the summer, hauling services for events and public recycling and composting, along with cameras for the recycling centre. Other brief news before I get into the update on hauling. We have bought dual new bear-proof bins for Main Street, High Street, middle corridors. So there's 10 of those that will be installed when time permits staff to do so. And finally, the other update is the Sustainability Action Plan was voted in, I think, April of 2015, sort of a year after the flood. About 75% of it's been completed, the priorities in there. About 20% can't be completed as framed, which leaves some that are still in the pipeline. So we are in the process of updating that plan with a whole bunch of new recommendations, revised recommendations, and so expect to see that coming through here at some point early 2019. And if anyone wants to meet to discuss ideas with that, I'm very happy to do that one-on-one. Quick update on the pay-as-you-throw single hauler piece. Not everybody was on the board in April when we presented about trying to find ways to maximize the reduction of waste being sent to landfill or reclaimable resources going to landfill. One of the recommendations that had the largest bang for its buck was the concept of increasing curbside services. So having potentially recycling and organics be picked up at curbside. The way to do that was through a process called pay-as-you-throw. That process essentially requires a different cost structure for the landfill portion of the disposal to the hauler. So for a small landfill bin, you pay a very low rate, and the larger bin you get, the higher your rate gets. The board heard the SFC's presentation and asked the SFC to investigate what that might cost, because to go to a model like that, we'd probably have to work with a single hauler in order to maximize the economies of scale. The SFC and myself put together a RFP. We asked EcoCycle to give input into that RFP before putting it out to the world. When EcoCycle were about to give input, one of the haulers actually asked that EcoCycle issue a conflict of interest statement, because they also do some hauling and they wanted to make sure that they were not bidding on the RFP as they were giving input, which is a very wise thing to have all those I's dotted. It sat with legal for a long while, that conflict of interest statement, because we completely overhauled our legal team. And so it sat 2 months with the old team without being dealt, and then by the time the new team came in, there was a huge priority list of which this was not the top, funnily enough, with everything that goes on in this realm. So legal did give advice, I think in, I think we have it in October. They did give advice and they requested, they suggested that we reframe it from an RFP where we're getting proposals to an RFI where we're getting information from the holders that will allow us to make the decision of whether or not to move forwards with this. And I think what we want to be very clear of is as we put out this RFI the end of next week, which is the goal, we will be getting numbers from the haulers about how much they would charge for an enhanced curbside solution. Our want is to be able to increase services without increasing price. If we get to a place where we're increasing services without increasing price, we will present that to the board. We'll present to the board our findings anyway, and probably make a recommendation to move forwards with an official RFP process. We've had a couple of questions come up. If it's a request for information, how do we protect the hauler's quotes? So if the hauler is responding to an RFI and they put all their numbers in that, can another hauler just request that information through Cora and then underbid them in the actual RFP process? So we're tweaking the proposal to protect the haulers a little more so that we'll only give you ranges and not specific information to the haulers. Does that make sense to anyone?
I guess I just want to ask a question clarifying whether is that really necessary when people, I mean, when you bid on a government contract and that bid goes to the town?
Well,
it seems like that
because we're doing a request for information, it's not an official RFP at this process, because we don't want to go to the RFP process until we've decided that we want to move forwards with this model, right? Until we see that it's cost effective. So it's not going to be official proposals coming in. So we will then, if we decide to move forward, have to issue an official RFP, at which point the haulers will put in their final bids. So there is an opportunity for the haulers to change their bids between the RFI process that will help us understand if we want to move forwards and the RFP process. And that risks some protections with each other. But legal can answer the question.
Yeah, and we did some additional research into this. Actually, another client asked me a similar question. I was able to use some of that same research. And there is a protection under Cora for trade secrets, privilege information, confidential commercial information, financial information is a whole other list. But essentially there is case law on this that if you do an RFI, that information can be considered confidential commercial information protected from disclosure, so long as there's a reasonable expectation of confidentiality, which is why we reframed the RFI the way we did.
But would an RFP also qualify?
An RFP could also qualify for that protection, potentially. Depends on how the expectations are set up.
I'm just wondering, without going out for an RFP, do you feel like we can get the information that we need?
I think we can. One of the recommendations from legal was to require, if haulers are going to submit an RFP, they have to submit the RFI first, so we will get the proposals from the haulers that will be submitting in the final piece. So people won't just sit this out and wait to propose, which would mean that we get the information that we need.
I guess I'm just confused, because I feel like if the concern is that their information is going to be exposed, but an RFP could offer the same protections, why not just do an RFP and save them the extra work?
So the reason,
Okay.
based on what staff was telling me, is that they weren't sure about enough details as to what the final product would look like, and we really need a lot more information to understand whether this could even work, what sort of models the collection would work. It was just there was not enough information about what could work in Lyons.
So we don't know what to ask for.
Correct. So we just
Okay.
need more
Sorry, I just
information.
wasn't quite following.
That was,
Okay.
and so based on what staff was telling me as to what they were requesting really, which is we need a lot more information for whether we decide to issue an RFP, a binding contract, that really the proper model for that is an RFI. And you can tie the two together through this being a prerequisite for an RFP, and we've done that in other contexts before. So it seemed to make sense based on what staff needed to recommend whether or not to do this.
Okay, I think I got it.
Okay.
Thank you.
Great, because I'm getting it too.
Okay, I understand.
So the timeline essentially moving forwards is that we've incorporated all Legal's feedback, all EcoCycle's feedback, and that will be issued on the end of this month, essentially. We will have 3 weeks of it being out there, and then we will hopefully be presenting to the board our findings in the first meeting of the year, or the second meeting of the year, agenda permitting.
Okay, any other questions?
Just one.
Mr.
Maybe
Brennan?
this might have been answered in a prior time when I wasn't here, but if Lions ever went to a curbside recycling option under a single haul or some other program, what would be the continuing need for the recycle center? Would that be?
It is a great question. So the curbside solves a few pieces, because ideally we'd want to roll in organics into it to make it worthwhile for us, because we do have a recycling center here. So in an ideal world, if we are not able to roll organics into a curbside solution or a solution, it might not be one that we move forwards with or recommend moving forwards with. We don't know the price point that everything's going to come at. If, however, we can roll in recycling into the curbside solution, it will free up funds from the county. The county currently pays for all the hauling of the recycling for both Lyons and for the greater Boulder County community that surrounds us. That funding could potentially be used for other diversion solutions. So whether that's adding yard waste collection to the center or scrap metal collection to the center would allow us to expand using the funding that's already allocated for us in different innovative ways.
So you might use it for other purposes than the big.
Yeah, there'd still probably be the need to have recycling there, because the single hauler curbside solution would only be for the town limits. We would not be able to reach into the planning community.
I believe we think the majority of the recycling use is actually outside of town limits.
I wouldn't say majority, but there is a large percentage
Yeah, I don't know that we know the
of
exact
it that's out
number,
at the
but
town
If
limits.
we
Because some
continue-
people already have recycling curbside.
Yeah.
If we continue to do that, to offer a recycling center, it wouldn't be the town of Lyons paying for non-residents to recycle. It would still be using Boulder County funds for that.
Absolutely, 100%. And this 100% paid for Boulder County currently in terms. Some of the servicing of the station moving forward may not be, so like snow removal and whatever that looks like.
The
But
fence and that, we do that kind of.
yeah, we've added some for the relocation, but we could absolutely use that for additional diversion that we desperately need in town, because Boulder County would have allocated funds towards us that we could divert and use for great purposes.
Okay, thank you.
Trustee Moore?
It's also my understanding that the single hauler would only serve residential in town, not commercial. Is that right?
This particular piece is residential offering. Commercial is a whole different animal in terms of service providers. The city of Boulder has put in place a zero waste ordinance for commercial that requires every business to compost and recycle, and that's not something that we are ready for wanting to impose in our business community at this point.
Yeah. So hopefully commercial would be using the recycling center as well.
Yes, absolutely, yeah.
All right, any other questions? All right, thank you for the update.
Excellent.
Thank you, Toby.
Okay, we'll go ahead and move on to our ordinances and public hearings. Will the clerk please introduce the first item?
This will be a public hearing for ordinance 1042, an ordinance of the town of Lyons, Colorado, amending Article 4 of Chapter 13 on the Lyons Municipal Code for the purposes of increasing the service rates.
Someone needs that?
Yeah.
Toby.
Right.
Is it
Turn
here,
it over to
Toby?
staff for a staff report.
Is this page, with the black page?
Okay, the Utilities and Engineering Board looked very closely at what was happening to the wastewater portion of the utility funds, and they talked with the board several times. We also had a rate study done in 2016 that discussed where our rates should be. Between those two pieces of information, the Utilities and Engineering Board recommended that we do a $4 per 1,000 gallon increase in our rates and leave the base fees as they are. And you'll see the table I included in there. It's also consistent with and on the low side of what our consultants recommended in the 2016 rate study to keep the fund somewhat solvent. So it would affect the average user in the town residential user based on their months of December, January, and February use about 3,000 gallons of water that's used to calculate their sewer rates. So the average residential user would see an increase of 3,000 times $4 or $12 a month. Aaron, anything else you'd like to add?
So, just a question, I guess, because looking at the budget, did the budget include this increase?
Yes, it did.
in the projection? Okay. So
I
it
don't know
does
if
not-
it's specifically listed that way.
Well, remember there was a best case and a worst case scenario, and the board asked us to put the best case scenario into the budget presentation. So the current presentation does include a $4 increase.
Because it doesn't look like that gets us into the black.
Not probably far enough.
So, does UEB have any comment on the proposal that's in front of us?
Different than what I had before, or refresher. You know, some of it was we already accepted that the town funds were gonna pay for some of the wastewater treatment plant, was why we didn't raise the rates right in the very beginning. And that we had been using some of the fund balance to pay for some of that cost. And we did raise the rates some. We raised it, it was raised half of what the UEB recommended before. But in looking at going forward, we didn't see the need for a complete going to the black now, that we were gonna try to do it over a longer period of time. A number of municipalities do raise their rates $1 a year or something like that, but rather than put that in the ordinance now, it was legally better to do what we want to do for the next year, and then in the following year, we can come back and do it, so that basically we would just have to come back each year if we need to continue to raise the rates. Or if something else changes, we find a different way of paying for some of the funds, we allocate the costs differently, then we can look at it at that time.
So, question for engineer Kabbalah. Does the best case scenario actually reduce the hauling costs at all, or are you assuming the cost side stayed the same as this year?
I'm assuming the cost side stays the same.
So it's assuming no change in performance. It's basically if our costs stay exactly the same as they are now, this rate increase will still be a $45,000, $46,000 shortfall operationally. Is that true? Is that,
Correct.
I just want to make sure I'm reading this correctly.
That's
I
correct.
understand
And
the
that's-
assumptions that went into the budget.
As we've made for assumptions always, we try to be conservative on the revenue and anticipate the worst with expenses. So this year was a terrible year for expenses at the wastewater plant. And we are trying some new methods with like different polymers and that centrifuge repairs and things. So, hopefully that is worst case for expenses. I think there's a possibility if we can get under control the next month or so, those expenses will be generous.
So about how many households are we talking? Is it about 900?
What's your number right now?
No, we were at
968?
1,000, right?
Yeah, we're assuming 1,000 round
1,000
number.
customers?
Yeah,
That latest report I couldn't remember, went to 1,000.
And we were back and forth a number of times, I haven't
1,011.
gone there.
Yeah, it was a little over 1,000 on the last one, but we were also down in the 600s at one point, so.
Okay. Any other questions from the board before we have the public comment? Okay, we'll go ahead and open up public comment on ordinance 1042 on the proposal to increase the sanitation service rates. Would anyone like to speak to this item?
No microphone for you.
It's fighting. I got you.
Okay, thank you.
Should we go down a little bit?
I'm Laverne Johnson, 306 Evans. I'm not actually asking for myself, but I'm asking for the senior citizens that are low income. And I don't know whether the seniors at Walt South pay their own utilities or not, but $12 a month on some of those seniors would really be a hardship. Some of them say, I don't even have a dime when my check comes. And so I would ask you for some kind of compensation for them. I think you do have a chart where, you know, they tell for utilities, and maybe you could do the same for them. But I understand that, yes, we have to cover our expense, and probably most people can afford it. And I'm actually surprised that no one else is here to complain, so that sounds good. I did hear a complaint down at the businesses, and this may come under your other agenda, that about the wastewater treatment plant not being big enough. And some of the businesses are complaining about that, and you may cover it, so, okay, thank you.
Anyone else?
Hi, Amy Reinholz, 141 County Drive. And like Laverne, I just kind of wanted to come to speak for people as well and express a couple of questions or concerns. It seems like, I know there are other things on your agenda tonight, but it seems like requiring the residential customers to carry additional burden of increased water treatment rates from the high strength BOD producers, whatever we call that. It doesn't seem like it's fair to the residential customers, the residents of Lyons, or to the businesses who are being responsible and following the rules to properly dispose of the kinds of waste that their business produces. And I don't know exactly how all this is related, but that's kind of what it seems like. And also, another question that the town of Lyons should be asking, I think, is it environmentally responsible to be putting the high strength BOD waste, but again, whatever it's called, I don't really know what it is, into the wastewater stream at all? And then what do other municipalities like Longmont require? That they allow that into their wastewater treatment plant? So those are just my questions, and since we're looking at this increase in rate, that will be hard for the residents, so, for some residents. Thanks.
Just a quick comment. I don't want to wade.
Can you,
Oh, I'm sorry.
Let me
Let me
record,
record.
sorry.
Linda Wickman, 218 Park Street. I've been following, and the wastewater treatment plant has been a problem literally for decades, even though we have a new one now. And I don't think I'm the only one confused as to why there's so much problem with the BOD and all the things that are wrong with this wastewater treatment plant. And for me, it comes down to a little bit of transparency as to, before charging people more money for extra fees because there's the base fee and then there's the usage and there's the sewer. It all adds up, and I'm wondering if there's been some kind of comparison among the communities of similar size. I know we did that a long time in the past, just for, I don't know, peace of mind if nothing else. And also, if I support Laverne's comments to a degree because we have some long-awaited affordable housing right down the street from me, and it's you know, it's wonderful to welcome these people into the community. And we're also looking at perhaps another affordable project. And if we're trying to bring people back into the community, we're bringing them into a situation that has very high utility bills. And so, is it absolutely necessary? Obviously, the wastewater treatment plant isn't working properly, but over the last couple of years, there's been a lot of finger pointing as to exactly what's the cause for the problem in the BOD, and then I read something about perhaps the level of allowed BOD is not up to code or up to speed with the state, and it seems like there's a lot of pieces that really haven't been brought together in a coherent manner and presented to the taxpayers. And so finally, I heard our town engineer say that raising the rates, $4 per 1,000 gallons might somewhat meet the need. Well, that doesn't cut it for a taxpayer. I think that a comprehensive plan needs to be made so that whatever is wrong with the water treatment plant, which can't possibly continue to be a mystery, someone has to have the answer to whatever that is so that it can be laid out coherently to everybody. Because we all want our town to be successful and all the inner workings and outer workings to be successful. So what's it take to have that happen? Because it's been going on for a really long time. So I'm hearing over and over, more fees here, more fees there, we're going to go into the red here for a while, and this is a big piece for all of us. So, thank you for the job that you're doing. I know it's not easy.
Thank you.
I'm Coco Gordon, 523 Fifth Avenue. Since I went through all the preliminaries for before this latest renovation of the wastewater facility, I wanted to just remind everybody, I'm sure I've said it many times before to the board, but for everyone in the audience also, is that when the prior board, not this board, but a board that was in control of the decision back when the new wastewater facility was decided, there were many different possibilities, and the one that was chosen by a prior board. And part of that was that the new facility would be permitted under an amendment to the old facility. That makes a big difference, because when you go with a permit that's permitting a prior facility and you want it to cover what's going to happen in the future, you don't know what the future is going to bring. And I don't want to point any fingers or anything, but that is part of the problem that really has to be decided by the board, what to do with it. I don't know what the best ways to handle it are, but that's what you inherited. And I just wanted to remind everybody about that.
Thank you.
Can I talk as an individual or not?
Yeah.
Aaron Kaplan, 100 Steamboat Valley Road. I just wanted to maybe comment on some of the questions and concerns about the overall, and we mentioned that people have been here talking for over years. There's probably tens of hundreds of hours talking about issues, talking about where some of these problems are, that the Utility and Engineering Board has a lot of documents on the town website that you can go find pages and pages on some of this when we've talked about Honeywell, and where different things are. And I don't know exactly how that would be coalesced to be one giant document, but it is all out there. And I do remember hearing that the general number is we should be raising the rates $12 per person per month, but the talk is now to reduce that back to $4 so that some of these other types of fees and other options can be looked into, so that residents are only looking at paying a smaller portion, a third of what the total cost might really be to try to cover all of our expenses. And that we all know we took on $300,000 more in expenses with the new loan for the wastewater treatment plant, and that's a pretty clear and simple cost that came in. There was to be some reduction, and again, we've talked about this numerous times, that there's reduction from this and gain from that, and here's what the number comes down to. But if you wanted to take $240,000 a year, we all knew that was coming, or anyone who looked at it 4 or 5 years ago, I wasn't looking at it then, would have been aware that we are taking on this new loan, and that's what these cost. So $240,000 split by 1,000 customers, basically. So that's my comment.
You're right.
I don't think there's anyone left in. Let's go. All right, I think we'll go ahead and close the public hearing. So we can open it up for board discussion, unless anyone had follow-up questions after the public comment. Yeah, town attorney.
Can I just put a motion on the floor maybe for
Yeah, we will.
discussion?
Okay, I just want to see if there are questions first. Any questions? All right,
I
is
do
there?
have one question.
Sure. Go ahead.
And I think for Victoria, just to describe how low-income families are currently provided for under
Sure.
the current.
Well, when the recommendation from the utility board came to the Board of Trustees, it was that this increase would affect the usage rates and not the base rates. And so most of our seniors aren't exceeding, the 3,000 gallons that would not see an increase. Okay, correct? And so that's number one. Second thing is, we do have a low income rate that is available to people who are below our HUD threshold for income. And that changes every year. Is it January?
Mm-hmm.
January of every year that changes. So if someone feels they are having a hardship and they might qualify for that, they certainly should come in and fill out the application, and they would be potentially eligible for a reduced rate on all their utilities, not just this one.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, thank you.
Question?
Based on that answer, where does the offset come from?
It actually is just built into our rates. We never know exactly, oops, sorry. We don't necessarily, we have only a handful. I think there's, what maybe you think? Low income, 12?
There's none.
It's like 12 maybe
Probably under
currently.
20.
Yeah, and so it's not a big enough impact that we have had to budget for it separately. It's absorbed through the system in the town.
Okay, let's get a motion on the floor and then we'll continue with discussion.
That's a good point, we should add it to our budget next year as a supplement.
When that document originally went out, I think a year and a half ago, I had sent it back, and I think I got lost in
Okay.
transfer. I was curious to know, so everybody would know, the ratepayers, where any offset comes from.
Mm-hmm.
Does it just, do they get the base rates the town actually gets, or are the ratepayers actually subsidizing that also?
Mhm.
That's do something nice that the public just has, so everybody knows.
Okay.
So it's out
Work
there.
on that.
I move for passage of ordinance 1042, an ordinance of the Town of Lyons, Colorado, amending Article 4, Chapter 13, the Lyons Municipal Code for the purpose of increasing the service rates for wastewater utility service.
I'll second the motion.
Okay, we'll open it up for discussion. Would anyone like to start? I'll kind of kick it off with a few things, I guess. Our UAB chair kind of stole a little my thunder with the comments there. I think that one thing we need to remember, I guess here's the bottom line. This is the way I see it. We built a new plant. We always knew we were going to raise the rates to pay off the loan for the new plant. Some of the offset for how much we were going to have to increase those rates was supposed to come through a savings on the operations of the plant. We have not realized that savings. So now what we have is we have a new loan and we have a plant that is not saving us money. In fact, it's costing us more money. And there are lots of reasons why that is. And some of that is still being discussed and trying to be understood, quite honestly, from the town's perspective. So, but the bottom line is we have a run rate now, or burn rate, if you want to call it, that is putting us in the negative several, I haven't looked at the latest numbers, but projecting several $100,000 a year, which is just not sustainable for an extended period of time until we figure out what the next steps are with the plant. I think, at least for me, I think that we always did know we were going to have to raise these rates to cover the loan. And, you know, it does not seem to me, I cannot recall if we've done any increases as of yet. Did we do the 6?
Yeah.
Okay, I know we talked about doing 12, so we did do the 6, but we didn't do the consecutive years of increases. Like, there was something we didn't do, and it was the consecutive years, the other half of that 6 that was supposed to come kind of shortly after. And some of that's just flood recovery busyness, and some of it is, you know, you just sometimes just don't get to some things. And now we are at the end of our year with the financial, you know, impacts that we're looking at on the plant. So I think that, you know, and I also do recognize that, you know, we are going to try to address some of the business community contribution as well. And that's also already in this proposed budget, was what we're estimating to get from the surcharges. I guess the one comment I have about the approach we're taking, I'm so appreciative that we're trying really hard to just hit the user fee. But the other thing that concerns me is there's no guaranteed dollars here. This is an estimate if nobody changes how they use wire. And so it's not a hard number, and we do need to realize that. It kind of concerns me to do an increase that's not even going to get us at least to where we're breaking even in the fund, even with the increase. So, I hate to say it, but I almost feel like it needs to be higher. And it could be either some small contribution on the base rate or just a higher dollar figure than 4 on the usage rate. And yeah, I'm not sure, I'm open to the discussion about whether, you know, we just find ourselves back in the situation again next year, having to do another big increase year after year. We did this with the electric fund, and, you know, at the time we said, let's just rip the Band-Aid off, do what we need to do, get the fund turned around, and, you know, we were successful with that. And we had some good luck with some rebates from Mean and things like that that have helped. But I also, you know, we have a lot of capital improvements that we have to make this year as well. We can't keep waiting on some of these things. So I'd like to urge the board to consider something higher than the $4 that's in the proposed ordinance. Mayor Burton.
I agree with that concept. I know it's so tempting to try to keep the current fee as low as possible, but all that does, when you're in a deficit situation, what that does is postpone and create a greater future obligation on the part of every resident. Having an increase now, and we heard about the potential for low-income families to get some help. But, you know, if what we end up doing is postponing for people who can afford it into the future, everybody is going to be hit with more expenses, more fee costs in the future. That's the way it works. If you don't pay your bills now, and the deficit continues, then it just means there's more deficit that has to be paid for at some point in time. And, you know, while it, you know, I mean, hurts everybody, I believe, everybody up here, it hurts our hearts to have to increase fees. But when the bill is there that has to be paid, and you only pay a part of it, the rest of it still has to be paid at some point. And I worry that if we keep stacking it, then future rate increases will actually be even higher. And nobody wants that. So the thing to do at this point, to me, is at least get to break even. From a business perspective, I would love to be able to say, well, let's increase it so we can contribute something to reserves, because we actually need to build reserves over time. But I don't know that we're quite at that point. I would be satisfied with getting to the point of break even.
I would agree with that, and I think that because I do think that we have made progress already getting the BOD down just by encouraging and inspecting pre-treatment and monitoring the fog program, so we're already seeing some improvement. I don't know if that has had any impact on cost yet. Not yet. So the question is it possible we could see some cost reduction this year, or is that going to require capital improvements to the plant?
Next year,
2019.
2019, yeah, we should see some things there. We're experimenting with a new polymer, and that seems to be very promising to help the centrifuge work better and to cut our hauling costs and things. And so hopefully that'll solve some of the problems.
What about reducing rain? How many times our contractor has to come out?
Yeah.
Yeah, that's what I meant. I guess it's, so
Yeah, it's
worst
the
case
same.
scenario, if
Oh,
we
sorry.
budgeted to get to break even and we saw some cost reduction, we might have a little better year and contribute something to our reserve.
And I didn't know, is the high strength POD any kind of I didn't think there was any money put into the budget for that, but maybe I didn't look at it.
Joe, no, did you?
Yeah, we had both.
It's in the notes there.
Okay.
There's a portion in there. Okay. Any other comments?
I'd like to ask
Trustee
Sam,
Carabas?
when this, sorry about that.
That's okay.
When when Eric first came here, a member of the board, Victoria, developed a small program that had feed-ins that we could put in a small amount of base rate, usage rate, and play with it and have figures. We kind of asked you guys to grab that and play with it as staff to see where things, did you guys do that? Get that from Lee? We'll get that from?
Yeah.
Where did your numbers work out that how many years out did we come in with different numbers, or 3-4 years out? Because we talked about several different things about 4 meetings ago about that. Where did you, when you were planning that program, or that, program?
Formula.
Formula, thank you. Where did it come out with base rates, usage fees, and how many years out that we stopped bleeding, we hit zero, and we started actually accumulating reserves, as Pro Tem Dreisaitl had mentioned?
Meaning what rate did we need to do
Yeah.
that? $8.
$8. And how many years out did we kind of stop the bleeding and start to save? Was it, how many years out was that?
That was fairly
Immediate.
Fairly
immediate.
immediate.
Yeah.
That would make up for the 45,000.
And then a little.
And it was just, when you found out that was just usage fee only, no $1 base rate? I
Right.
know some members had asked about putting some base rates in there and see what that did. So
Yeah,
the $8 was the best for getting a couple of years in and going, stopping the bleeding? Is what
Right.
you- Okay.
Based on that and the UEB's recommendations of how to do it.
Okay.
Now, one thing I would like to say is, as I presented this, I just gave you the residential rates. Businesses bear even more, greater than this, because they're getting hit for every 1,000 gallons they use all year round. So they're even paying more of this share. It's not just the residents. I just gave you that portion, because businesses are really hard to average. You know, we've got users doing thousands and thousands of gallons, and some people that just do 1,000 gallons because they have a very residential type building without a kitchen or shower. So it really depends. But they are included in this rate increase.
Any other comments from the board?
I'll just say I agree with the mayor and the mayor pro tem, that I do feel like it should be higher. I think we should nip this in the bud. I'm a little on the fence with base rate, I think if we increase it high enough on the usage side, we don't really need to touch base rate at this point. I do think that helps a little bit with the lower income and the smaller family homes are, not going to absorb it as much. And then I also just wanted to reiterate that the wastewater treatment plant is really designed for residences and to meet the capacity of our residences, not our commercial businesses. So I don't have an issue with putting a surcharge on the businesses because they're basically extra to that wastewater treatment plant and kind of need to pay their share to keep it operating properly. So that's where I fall.
Trustee Miller?
I have, obviously I'm struggling with the rate increase for obvious reasons because I don't have a lot of money myself. And I also advocate for the rest of the folks who don't. However, I also know where we are with this whole thing. And I also know that there's an environmental factor here, and anybody that knows me knows how I feel about the environment. So there is a personal responsibility to the environment that we all have at this point to not use as much water, and therefore wastewater. So that being said, my biggest issue with raising the rate, and I would be okay with raising it to the $8 that we need to get to be done with it, peeling off the Band-Aid, so to speak. Because I do think that that's probably just easier to just take it all at once, the pain. But my biggest fear is that the people who cannot afford to pay their bills now and can't necessarily qualify for the program, that are kind of in that middle range, also may not have the money to like hire a plumber to fix their toilet so it doesn't run all the time, or find an efficient washer, or get those pieces together and the costs to do the things that they need to do to put the high efficiency stuff in place, to keep their bills lower, even if they were diligent about not using a whole lot of water. So that's my biggest fear. Whether they're renters or owners, even if you rent, a lot of times you end up doing the stuff yourself, regardless. So that's all I have to say about that. I do agree with Julie about the usage only aspect. I don't think that we should put a base rate on here right now. I think it should be strictly usage.
Trustee Brown?
I would echo that comment as well. Base rates, as the UEB recognized, hit everybody regardless of usage or income level. And while that's tempting because it's more certain dollars, it's just more regressive than doing a usage increase. It has some relation to at least the amount of water used. I agree with the comments that it's not really sooner or later. Sooner we're going to, rather than later, we're going to have to get this fund into the black. However, this is a two-year board, or we each elected to two-year terms, and so barring unfortunate tragedy or something, all of us will still be here next year. And the same board will be looking at this again. There are two things that could happen, and I couldn't put a probability or possibility on either one of them in the next year that might cause this fund to get into the black. One of them would be a favorable resolution of the Honeywell situation. Pure speculation as to whether that will happen. It's something we keep talking about and working on. We might get there in the next year, or we might not. We might spend a lot of money in the next year and still not have resolved Honeywell. We don't know, but we're trying. The second thing is, if the Eastern Corridor property sells during the next year, that will also put more money into the wastewater fund. Its current balance reflects part of the cost of the Eastern Corridor property. If neither of those two things happen and this fund is still in the red when it comes budget time next year, we're going to have to, at that point, I would favor biting the bullet to whatever degree is necessary to get it in the black. Doing the rest of it in one more lump sum and be done with it. For right now, I think the $4 increase gets us closer there and gives us the possibility, if any of those things work out, of getting us into the black, so I can reluctantly support a $4 rate increase. And I do want to emphasize something that's already been said, but the residents' comment was well taken. I'm not sure all other residents understand the reason, and Aaron hit this as well, why we have to do this. It's not really a question of choice. We borrowed money to build a new plant. Whether the new plant is the best plant in Colorado or it's the worst plant in Colorado, we got to pay that money back. We have no choice in that, and that accounts for $300,000 per year at the moment of the $350,000 a year deficit. No matter if the BOD level was way below where we even projected, we'd still be paying that $300,000. And that's something we ultimately don't have any choice about unless the town wants to default on its loans, and that's not something we're going to do. So $300,000 of this we have to cover with a rate increase. The other $50,000 does relate primarily to the BOD problem, and we're going to take up that ordinance next. So I'll support a $4 increase. And we can't commit the future board, we can't vote on next year's budget, but it's my opinion that this time next year, if this fund is in the red, we just raise the rates to where they need to be to get it in the black.
So I just have one question, because I've run some numbers about what going to 5, 6, or 8 would do, and looking at the budget, we're about 45,000 short of being in the black. And I show that if we went to $6, that would be about $60,000 more than what's in there currently at 4. So I'm just wondering, the $8 number you put out there, whether, I wonder if it has to be that high. I guess my question is, it seems like 6 might get us there.
Well, are you got the budget? That's one of the things I was gonna ask at my comment on the budgeting. You have it where the loan is being taken out of fund balance? The budget I received from Jim has a line that says loan is coming out of fund balance. And I was gonna comment that was when I liked all the operating expenses, that if you're looking at purely the operating in that top level, there's total revenue, total expenses, but then he separated out for operating, and if you're looking at just operating, that doesn't include the loan from the way I took it. So, if the loan is already coming out of fund balance, because if you're talking about 45,000, that seems really low to me. And I had a different budget than you guys do, I think. But if it looks the same, if in the top section of numbers, isn't it say loan from fund balance? The 5th or 6th line down?
I'm just looking. I don't know if Jim is here to answer that question.
Honestly, looking.
I mean, I don't know if the way it's presented here is reflecting where the money is coming from, or if it's just showing us, I mean, it does say that here, you're correct. It does say less total fixed charges, non-cash, less principal paid by fund balance, and less CIP.
And that's to make the budget work. So
The operating budget.
If loan is in operating much bigger.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, you're right, that's true. I think though,
I mean, I don't want to go that way, but I'm just
there's,
saying that that may be the reality.
go ahead.
Yeah,
Mayor
the,
Pro Tem.
and that, one of the effects of that is that in 2017, the total available fund balance without three-month reserve policy was 1.4 million approximately. In the 2019 budget would have it go down by the end of the year to 250,000, which says we couldn't do it again. So if we're rolling the
And that seems
dice,
off too. I don't see how that, I don't see where it would drop to 250,000.
well, that's what's here. So,
Yeah, I haven't had time to look at those. I got it on Friday, but.
but what it says though, if it goes down, if this number is correct, or the total available fund balance December 31st of 60,000, we couldn't do again what we're planning to do. We would then be in the position of having to increase, and having to increase more than we would if we increased now.
And I, in general, looking at it over the years, it's gone down about 300,000, the fund balance. So that's the number I go by in my head. And I know some of that has, don't forget we have, like you said, the Eastern Corridor money taken out that we, sounds like have coming back in, which would bump that up 450,000.
Well, but I would say we shouldn't look at assets to run operating costs. I mean, I don't think.
Well, no, but we took
While it
450,000
bumps the
out.
reserve up, it does, you're correct, and it would bring the reserve back, but
Right.
we shouldn't be using that
We should be
for
looking at-
CIP and things.
And that's why I wanted to try to make sure that, to me, the loan should be operating expense. It's there, it's an operating expense. All right, didn't mean to open up another can of
No, I
worms,
mean, it's a valid point.
but
I mean, I just see the total, the 1391, is adding the 1391 that I see in the first page for just the sanitation fund. The total, the page 5, 1391, which includes the principal and interest for that loan, right? The 247 that is included in here. He's just breaking it out, so he put total fund expenditures 1391, which is included in that number, but then he just takes out each of them, one for the loan, and then he separated the CIPs from it.
so what's the total fund revenue? The top line? I don't have it in front of me.
Total fund revenue.
Because that's all you'd have to look at, I think, is look at total fund revenue and total fund expense.
Total fund revenue.
$1,058,000.
Right, and total fund expense,
$1,391,000.
Right here.
so that's 340,000 short,
Mm-hmm.
because the loan is, that's 40,000 that you're saying, plus the loan of 300 coming out of fund balance. What I think, I don't know.
So to me, it's like there has to be some kind of stem the bleeding, because the way I look at these numbers, I could be wrong, but we couldn't do this again. We can do it this year if we wanted to, but we caused the balance to be so low that you can't do it again.
Yeah, I mean, I think what we're seeing is we are getting a capital investment fee, but we're spending all of that and then some on the CIP project. So that's kind of a negative, slight negative to the fund. We have an operating loss, which is a negative to the fund. So, you know, and then the loan payment, you're right, I mean, if you add that to the operating loss, whether it's coming out of fund balance or operating, we gotta pay it.
Yeah.
So we're really looking at a minimum probably of a 350, some shortfall. Just
Yeah, and
to
so
pay
that's
the
why
loan and
in
do
your
that.
package, Jim put 3 scenarios, the water fund by itself, the sewer fund by itself, and then because technically the 2 funds, you put the combined, so you could see that you may be carrying it a bit with water, you know, until we get this under control.
So I'm just trying to, so if we went to $8, that would generate about $288,000 of additional revenue. Some of that's already baked in here because 4 is already in there, and we're still not even, so what's in here is with a $4 increase.
Yes.
That's the other thing we gotta remember, the 4 is already in here and we're still over $300,000 short. So, I mean, technically, it would probably take close to $15 increase per 1,000 gallons to get us truly in the black with the loan pot.
Are you talking about $15 per 1,000 gallons? Oh my God. That is.
I'm not suggesting that's what we do, I'm just saying,
Right, some
that's the
things
number. Some things
are
seems,
different, but yeah, because I thought we've talked for the last few months, looking at it as the total number, like I had mentioned, would be 12, but
it would make sense though,
We were-
because 12 was assuming the cost savings. And we're not getting the cost savings, so it's gotta be higher.
Oh, right, yeah.
So it makes
the
sense.
cost savings from Honeywell, we
From the
weren't,
new plant.
we weren't including that. The
No,
UED wasn't in my stuff that we do, but
No, I think when we had our board discussion, I remember this one so vividly, because we had hours worth during a budget meeting about how much these increases were, and I think it was based on the projected operating cost from the new plant at the time, which I don't even know if it was operational yet, but it was going online that year.
so you're talking years.
I'm talking a couple years
Well,
ago.
plus it was a year behind, so we were
Right.
supposed to have that savings that first year as well. So we just,
Right.
yeah, every year we just get further behind.
And if I were a resident, I would be furious right now too, and I am a resident, and I'm not looking forward to pay this, and keep in mind, any increase we do is gonna hit our businesses at least 2 to 3 times what it's gonna hit the residents. Because every business, I mean, just the average resident, or restaurant, that's washing dishes and using water is using twice as much at least as a resident, most likely. So when we talk about, you know, this isn't just a residential increase, actually, it's hitting everyone, and that's gonna be substantial, and then we throw the surcharge on top of that. So everybody's gonna feel this pain.
One of the features of the wastewater treatment plant is that it's our plant, which is mostly sunk costs. There's some variable costs, but it's mostly sunk costs. Unlike the electric and water funds, which, you know, a good portion of that is variable costs. In other words, we buy the water from Longmont, and so if we buy less, you know, there's less costs. If it's electric, if we buy less, well, not quite, but if we buy less, it is somewhat less of a cost because we're passing it through. Whereas the wastewater treatment plant, we just own it, and it's a big fixed cost that's there with some fairly, you know, it's relatively small variable costs involved. So it's not like we can be, you know, super efficient, and that makes it better. I mean, businesses not putting BOD in that will help a lot, but it's not like you use less sewer and the costs go down a lot. They don't go down much.
In terms of comparisons, we have done that, and I can't recall.
It
like,
changes
where
every
we
year,
lie.
and
Yeah.
so I believe Kim just did that recently again. But why don't we, we'll get it ready, again, it's the end of the year, so there'll be all new rates coming out for everybody.
I have ours, I don't have it here now, I can
Yeah.
email, which went Netherland, Longmont,
Yeah.
Boulder, Erie, some other smaller ones. The comparison was that Longmont and Boulder are really low because
They
they're
have more
much
people,
larger.
so where the cost went.
Netherland is really high because they just got a new wastewater treatment plant. And so that was a
Yeah.
comparison to look at. And they're one that's higher than us, probably because of their new plant.
Yeah, I kind of recall us being somewhere in that middle
Right.
range. We're not the lowest, but we're not the highest, and.
But if you compare us to similar communities with a new plant, I think we're in line. But we could try to do, for the sake of, you know, some of your public comments, we could do some new postings on comparisons for the public so they understand it better.
So, to try to offer maybe a way forward, I don't think we can delay this. I don't think we can kick the can down the road. I think we have to do something, even if it can't get us all the way there. It's a step in the right direction. I think 4 is too low. It's not enough to make a dent. I think 8 is probably closer to where we have to go, because I think we're looking at another similar type increase potentially next year unless we get some resolution on or can do something to improve the efficiency of the plant. I'm sorry, the public hearing is closed. I'm sorry, we can't take any more public comment.
Yeah, there was a comment just asking if we increase it now, is there a chance of a rollback later? And I think that's always an option for the board if things ever settle, or when they settle down, if they settle down.
Potentially. I mean, I think also, say we make a capital improvement to the plant in some way that improves the efficiency. I think you could add drying beds, you know, or something like that, that might reduce the hauling. I mean, I don't know. I'm not an engineer expert. I've heard some suggestions thrown around. But, you know, that's going to be a different discussion. I think what we have to look at is we have a budget for this year that's significantly short. So. Would anyone like to offer an amendment?
I'll offer an amendment to, I'd like to amend section 2A, I think is what it would be, the chart with the rates. And the figure in number 2 of the chart, residential consumers with metered town-provided water service. The $9.50 would be amended to $13.50, which equates to the $8 increase versus a $4. And then I would amend number 3, non-residential consumers with metered town-provided water service, from $9.25 to $13.25. Again, an increase of 8 versus an increase of 4.
Is there a second for the amendment?
I'll second the amendment.
Comments or discussion on the amendment before we call for the vote?
I just have a question. Really, I mean, this is calling it a base fee, right?
There are 2 fees listed in the chart, the base fee and then the per $1,000 gallon usage fee. So my amendment only increases the usage fee. It continues to leave the base rate the same for both residential and commercial.
Okay,
And
currently there's
non-residential.
not a base fee, correct?
There is.
There
currently.
is a base.
There is.
But no,
Oh,
but no increase to it at this
no
time.
increase, okay,
Yeah.
okay. Just wanted to clarify that.
Is there any further discussion?
That increase would generate somewhere over $20,000 a month, right? $8 times 3,000.
24.
Not 20,000.
And then times 1,000 customers, 24,000 a month.
Yeah, so, and could we dedicate a portion of that so that, and I'm not quite sure how it would work out mathematically, but to increase the number of people who would, in other words, we could, if we could do HUD plus 10% or something like that as the income limit.
I think we would need a separate ordinance in order to do that.
No, I understand, but not that it would be baked in here, but it would be another discussion, it would be another posting, and I understand all that, but I'm just saying, you know, just thinking out loud that that may be something that we could consider at another time. But somehow to address at least a portion of the issues that have been brought up, you know, in terms of the people who are most badly affected.
I do have one other question. We may want to consider doing a more thorough analysis, because one of the things we might consider is a different increase for the non-residential versus the residential. Because one thing we're not factoring in here is the business contribution. We don't know how many businesses do we have that are, and what's the average use of those businesses? Because if they're contributing more, we might be able to raise the residential less. Does that make sense? Maybe the residential increase doesn't need to be as high, because we're really, if we're just saying 1,000 residential customers, we're basing our revenue generation on just that portion, and we're not taking into account any contribution from the business increase, we're really shortchanging ourselves a significant amount of this money.
Did you think, Joe, we billed for 30 million gallons? Wasn't that it last year? I mean, we have the total number of gallons billed for.
Okay, it ran about, our average was about 2 million gallons per day. I don't know that number.
Right, we'd have to look back. You would have talked about it. We'd have the total. I mean, it gets real complicated. I'll throw another wrench of it. We'd probably do about 54, I think is what, maybe it was 49, and we budgeted 54 million gallons going through the wastewater. But we don't bill on waste. We bill on water because some of that is going into others, and it looked like we were only billing for 30-some million gallons. But again, you're trying to average that across everybody, so it doesn't necessarily matter, but that's where I thought we came up with. So you would know how many gallons in total you have, and you could then determine your total revenue. You have to split that then to residential, non-residential.
So just think that if the average, just assume it's double, I mean, the average business would be increasing their monthly rate by about $78 out of 13, or roughly 13. So we're not really factoring that in to how much revenue this is going to generate. And I don't know, I don't have those numbers, I don't know, I can't guess how many. I mean, I know there's not as many businesses, but they're using a lot more water, and they're not getting a 3-month average,
Well,
correct?
some are.
Some are,
And
but
some
some
aren't.
aren't. Any ballpark whatsoever of how much, what the ratio is of business to residential in terms of a monthly, so for a month of revenue, how much of the revenue comes from business versus residential?
I don't
Any
know
ratio?
I
that.
don't know it offhand, but we certainly can get it.
Yeah, but I don't have that.
I don't know if we want to table.
Well, so here's where we are. I mean, we
$6.
have a motion for increasing it by another $4 for both. What we could do is vote on that and then withdraw the primary motion and see if we want to take a harder look at what these numbers will do.
A motion to continue to date certain precedes all other motions.
That's right. That's
So you
right.
could-
So you could do that now, and
Yeah.
we just really kind of come back to it. It's up to the board. I mean,
Pretty sure it's 30,000 gallons. You can take 30,000 times $24. gonna give you what we expect to get in the revenue, that's everybody.
30
30, yes,
million. You're
right,
saying
or
thousand.
30,000 gallons.
30,000.
Because we're raising it
Yep.
per 1,000
Yep.
gallons. So 30,000 times 20, not, we're times $8. So $8 1,000 gallons we're talking about going up. So if we really have 30,000 of those 1,000 gallons, it's 30,000 times 8. Be 240,000.
But $4 is already baked in, so it's only an additional $4 increase.
Okay, right, if you're looking at 120, that's what I think it's gonna be.
Yeah, it's somewhere below.
That still seems,
Oh.
so you're saying that the total water we're billing out a month is 30,000 gallons?
Not a month, in a year,
30 million.
we bill up
Oh,
30 million,
I'm sorry.
which is 30,000 gallons, because we're talking
Per
about
month.
1,000 gallons increments.
Yeah. Oh, so
Not per month
30,000
at all.
thousands.
Right.
Oh my God.
But a lot of that bill.
We can do the million to 1,000
Yeah, but a
conversion.
lot of
That's
that
what it
bill
is.
Well, that's
doesn't
why
go to the
I'm-
rate.
Because the
to sewer.
formula is based on thousands.
Right, I got
Some
it,
of
so
it
I'm
does.
trying to figure out what the
30,000.
So
total.
all the
thousands.
residents that water their lawns doesn't go to that.
No, I thought that was up at 54 million.
But how
you
does
can
that
look it
account
up.
for the first 3,000?
What do you mean account for the first 3,000?
That
The
this-
one we were talking about averages, the average user is 3,000.
Yes.
We don't have a way to look at totals, but we can look at the total number of gallons, the total bill in a year. Rather than talk about averages, we want to know how many gallons do we bill people for in a year? Not treat specifically, we treat more, but how much do we bill? And we bill for 30 million gallons. You could try to look it up if you want to, but I think that's,
I think what I'm trying to understand is it worth looking at these two rates separately and considering different rates for residential versus non-residential? But I feel like I'm trying to kind of guess. And the option we have is do something and just do the same for everybody. But this is gonna mean about a $24 per month increase on the residents. And so, and we don't really know what the business contribution is going to be. We're basically basing it on the residential households. Am I correct?
Yeah.
The number we're projecting. So I think we have more revenue here because we're not counting the business component. So the question is, just go ahead and do it, or continue this and get a better look at the business contribution.
I think we were just trying to give the average to the residential user. We were including commercial in our figuring, because we were looking at the total accounts, 1,000 accounts, not just the residential, that's the total accounts. We were just saying what the average cost would be for a resident. We didn't want to say the average cost for commercial would be the same, because it might be different. But overall, I think the numbers balance out. But then, right, you could look at that, or you could do the $4 now, and then we do that for next year's.
Or increase it to 6.
Trustee Careless?
Based on what you're asking, the difference between the residential and the commercial kind of puts back into, to me, what Trustee Brian was saying is roll the 4. By May or June, we'll know where we're at with both numbers. And if residential is fine and we're bringing in more revenue off the $4 increase off commercial, or if commercial needs to be more also, we'll know probably by May or June. We'll see the figures. We'll see 3 months of figures coming in at the new rates. And the UEB's pretty darn good at looking at these numbers and going through it. We'll have a fairly good idea of where we're gonna land come budget season. So it goes, so I would almost suggest we drop the amendment, stick to the original motion at 4 across the board, and see where we are in May, June, July.
All right. Any further comments on the amendment? I'm gonna vote with you on that. I still feel like we have some urgency, we know we have increases. 4 now at least starts the process. But I really feel like we need more analysis. I think we need more granularity as to what the ratio is for business to residential for the next increase we do. And I would actually say we should probably not wait. I think we should do this analysis after the first quarter and get an idea.
Well, I think you aren't gonna see the big usage increase till the summer months.
I can give you the commercial and residential type. So I have the
Breakdown.
quarterly reports for water, and that's gonna tell me what, I mean, it can at least give percentages of what's residential versus commercial.
Would you rather would this recommendation be from our level be to table this to the 3rd?
No.
No, okay.
No, I think what I'm hearing you
To
say
bring
is
that
we're gonna
back
base
number.
residential
Just for
on
next
their
time.
winter usage anyway. And so we will have a pretty good idea if our numbers are we making all the right assumptions, I guess, is the question. And do the assumptions need to change and get more information on the breakdown between residential and business? So that if we wanna do something different with the next increase, rather than hit the residents with an $8 when we don't have.
But the businesses, it is based month by month on their wastewater for the summer when they're increasing, so we won't see that.
I see
until
what you're saying.
summer.
But we can look back a year.
But we could do a look
last year.
back on that,
Yeah.
because that's
Yeah.
probably not gonna change a lot.
So
My
we had a couple
philosophy on
businesses
my
closed.
suggestion
Yeah.
is, we do not kick it down the road, because the previous board, 5 of us, we budgeted for 2018 to have an increase. We didn't put it in. I don't think we can go another meeting, we need to get it in there so it gets fed into the
Get
system.
something started.
We budgeted, we didn't do it, we need to do it.
For several years.
Yeah, so I suggest we don't accept the amendment and we go with the original amendment 4, and then we'll, like I said, I think we'll know. Aaron will have the numbers first quarter, we'll know May, June, July in this board.
Just an observation, I believe that will make the problem about $100,000 worse. If we're willing to accept that. I mean, it's sort of a gamble because it might not, but.
And I'm basing that on the discussion of the non-residential rates of the use of the paying, we don't know, but we also can't keep kicking the can down the road and wait for more analysis. Because depending, I don't know what the agenda's looking like for the next 3 meetings, but there's a good possibility that we may not get to it again until January. And then we're right back to where we were a year and a half ago. That we didn't put an increase in when we budgeted for it.
But what I'm saying is that if we do $8 now, it will make the issue about $100,000 better. If we wait and do four now and then 4 later next year, it's likely to make the issue about $100,000 that still needs to be made up in the future. We can do that, and I'm not saying that that's not an option, I'm just pointing that out.
Trustee Miller?
If we vote on the $8 and vote no,
Trustee Brown?
No, I'm going to stick with UEB's recommendation for 4,
Yeah.
with, again, the proviso that if we're in the situation next year, it may not be another 4, it may be 4 plus something else next year. We're going to have to fix it. And it's maybe delaying the pain, but I'm not prepared to support more than 4 at the moment.
Just to be clear, we cannot do it next year. There will not be the money there unless some miracle happens. There will not be that money unless something falls out of the sky, which is a possibility. I mean, there are.
Well, the numbers are wrong, and I think the numbers on that part are wrong, but.
So I'm hearing
Understated.
that we might want to go ahead and move forward with the 4, but I would have the caveat that I don't think we can wait until next year. I'm saying I support the 4 because I want a deeper analysis done on the business to residential ratio, and I want to see how things look after the first quarter. I'm interested to see if our costs can come down, and I do think after 1 quarter, I would like to see the board bring back the UEB analysis and give us the information about whether further action is needed even yet this year. So I'm not saying I would wait to, because I agree, I don't think we can kick this can down the road. We're back where we were with the electric fund 5 years ago. And we did we made a presentation to the board, a quarterly requirement until we had the reserves back to where it needed to be. And we're not quite in that situation here because we do still have some reserve because we're really combined with the water fund, but we are flirting with negative numbers here in our reserve. One more year of this, the Mayor Pro Tem is absolutely right. We do not have the money in the reserve for basically 2019 to float these loan payments one more time without the right increase. But I don't feel comfortable raising the residential rates to 8 after thinking about the fact that we haven't really looked at this with what the business contribution brings. And I'm all for keeping the residential portion of this down. I mean, as low as we can for the reasons that we're talking about. So I'm going to call for the vote on the amendment. The amendment was to increase this to $13.50 and $13.25. Right, so it does fail 1, 2, 5. We have a motion on the floor to approve the ordinance as is. Any further discussion before I call for that vote?
I'm just like to say one thing, as you asked the UEB to review this, I would ask that staff allow the UEB as much access to all the numbers and charts. I know you've asked for stuff, Aaron, former trustee Kerr, who was a member of that board, who spent a lifetime analyzing numbers, has offered his free services to go over this with a fine-tooth comb, that we make sure that Mr. Kerr and Aaron have access to everything, of course, minus the personal information that, the information that you can't have. To get this as soon as possible, because he has offered his services since he spent a lifetime analyzing these exact kind of data. I think we should probably take him up on that and utilize that.
I'll call for the vote on the amendment. Or I'm sorry, on the motion, on the ordinance. All right, the ordinance does pass at the $4 increase. I would like to request that we have a formal motion to the staff to bring an analysis back to us after the first quarter of 2019.
So moved.
Second.
I'll call for, any further discussion first, I'm sorry? Maybe not, I'll call for the vote. Okay, so we'll see an analysis on
After the
first quarter of 2019, just to see where we're at that time. All right. Should we take a short recess?
Yeah, yes, please.
All right, is there a motion for a short recess?
So moved.
Second. All in favor? All right. Okay, assume trustee Ryan. Okay.
Raise your hand.
Yeah.
Public hearing on the second. That clear everything up for you, Linda? More transparency?
He basically said
For right, we
that
can-
he was going to amend it, but had such debt after a couple of years, so the contract,
No.
Oh, and I went outside, he just said, I went out to tell him that. During giving me all the documents, I appreciate
Try to
that.
put, right, if we could, staff could put it together somehow in a coherent manner, it's all sort of there, scattered around our UEB stuff. You can find a lot if you go to UEB minutes, I don't know if you want to read through them all, but
No, of course not.
most
We-
people
we-
mention they're pretty good.
And for this representation, so we don't have to, thank you.
Do that.
You know, yeah, and depend on you. Without we try, right? Completely understand.
Right.
I think there's a lot to that one.
I just wanted to emphasize to us some more knowledge of that as a priority, sort of, compared to a lot of things out there.
Well, yeah, no, I don't want to read all of that.
But if we could, right, even just, I mean, if it's together as one topic compared to needing to, because you need to go through all the different things in there. And that's, I wanted to, but I'm not putting in the time for that. But if somebody could correlate all the different things. You'd have stuff on electric, stuff on water, stuff on wastewater, that's all in there. Then somebody could find what they want a little bit quicker.
Thanks for your comments. I have the same questions. I started shooting in our new emails to get some of those questions answered. I still haven't figured it out.
Everyone's voting on raising rates on something that is clear that it's not all the way through, and so then it's already done. It's done and over now.
Oh, that's
And it seems to make sense to me if someone wanted to say, this is a year or 2 years, it will roll, automatically roll back unless it's shown that it has a, yeah.
That used to be one.
Well, no, I know that way, that nobody knows what's the information. And that was very frustrating to me. If I were hiring, I would have a project done at my house, I would never agree to pay a certain amount of money if I knew the end product was going to be fixed.
On the website.
I don't know how that would.
And then they all died and
How much
then
is
they sold it to Raul, I think.
What
it's
raise?
$300,000.
300,000 goes for elimination, 50,000 goes for operations. Well, we got the money, save us some money, well, that's gonna be in litigation.
We'll see. I don't think it was just
About 10 times since I've been on.
yeah, so are we spending money every single time on lawyers?
Oh, yeah.
That's
Well, if you don't spend money on lawyers,
I understand.
we pay it to Honeywell.
I understand.
If we drop lawyers, we have to write $500,000 check to Honeywell, too.
So that loan payment is 240,000 a year? 300,000 a year for,
So that's the debt service.
that's the debt service.
Handling of
Right,
it.
yeah, right.
Oh,
Don't be blaming me that it's 9:20 and they're only on the first one.
You want me to remind you of that?
Don't be blaming me,
Oh,
no.
That's
I
why
won't say
sometimes you don't
anything
want to
else.
say, do I want to say anything? I don't want to say anything because it's going to go on.
Controversy.
Yes, when it's important, you gotta speak up.
We used to come.
Let it go.
And what's the total debt on that?
That's only debt, that's a 300,000.
200, is it 2.4 million or is it
Oh.
16 million? or-
Right, it was over 20 years.
Yeah, so it's about
So I don't know what the, I mean, the total cost, I don't know what the loan
6 million.
was, right, principal versus
Got it,
interest.
and I left you a voice message as soon as I got
So
back.
it's about 6 million, 300,000.
Yeah, I thought you were gone.
Yeah, I wasn't working.
Well, I was,
Are you sure that the group of people
I guess
that
that's a lot of
waste
time.
treatment plant now are doing
asking
Does that,
beforehand.
I mean, I know it goes out to bid
I
on
know.
occasion.
It's there, it's there.
And
Well,
it's
some of
been
them-
a problem for so long, an issue that
Right.
they
No,
don't know what they're
there's,
doing.
well, there's so many different things, like 3 different contractors involved in different parts. The state says now we have to have the people that were supposed to be out 3 days, have to be out 5 days because the BOD level is so high. That was, so they're dictating how much. Saying, okay, now you gotta pay 250 more because you have to have them out 5 days instead of 3. The other then is even the measurement. We've been trying to find is someone doing the measurement levels doing something wrong? Or was part of it built, there was some talk that something might be looping back and doubling BOD levels. I think we got something verified that that's not happening. But we had concerns to make it something somebody then has to go out and look into. But then I asked what, with staff, and with, you know, what can we ask staff to do? But that's again why I say that the utility just needs to focus. We don't have staff. Focus on the weight. I go back to my getting involved with, out the door, you can't have water without water, and then have gas or electric, and then it all goes down to that basement.
It's not that way. The BOD level, the permit was old and the BOD level might actually be appropriate levels if it was actually an updated permit. Do I have that wrong?
No, we have pending now a request for a race permit. And what was the number also? $70,000 to apply for the permit.
Plan,
Up the permit levels.
but the new plant would have, so the new plant was just a rebuild of the old standard permit. We didn't pull a new permit. Pulling a new permit and doing a whole new one, I heard, was millions more, I don't know how much. So that's why they didn't do that, was to save it at that time. It looked to be okay.
Thank you for your comments. Thanks for coming out.
This one does. Oh, I've got my Halloween candy ready. Some point. I think I even have sour.
You mean you got your kids Halloween candy?
Save on one.
There, is that
Cut their scale down.
All right, let's go ahead and get started. We have the next public hearing. Will the clerk please introduce the item into the record?
This will be a public hearing for ordinance 1045, an ordinance of the Town of Lyons amending Article 4 of Chapter 13 of the Town of Lyons Municipal Code for the charges for wastewater utility service and creating high-strength surcharge.
Is there a staff report? Presentation?
Sure. Basically, what's happened is our biochemical oxygen demand loading has been a lot higher than anticipated during the design of the plant. As a result of this, we've been forced to have an operator at the plant 5 days a week instead of the budget at 3. And we're using more chemicals than we anticipated. Those extra costs are roughly $50,000 a year. What this ordinance does is using some industry averages for different types of business categories. It takes the restaurants and the alcohol generators, for lack of a better term, the folks who produce alcohol-related products, and charges them a surcharge based on how many pounds of biochemical oxygen demand the average business of that type uses. And it generates the $50,000 in extra costs that we're currently incurring in operating revenues. Had all these businesses been down, we should be only operating the plant 3 days a week. And that's where that charge is coming from. It also provides a mechanism in the ordinance for those businesses to demonstrate to us through a series of savings of series of measurements that they've reduced their numbers to the residential rates, and then or whatever rate they've reduced it to, and then their surcharges would drop. As at some point our costs should drop.
And I would
go ahead.
Just add that it wasn't strictly because of the high BOD levels. That may be pressing it to the higher, more importance, but having high-strength waste surcharge is somewhat standard with most wastewater utilities, and something that was being talked about when I first got involved 4 to 5 years ago was already something that was supposed to be being looked into and being done. So it's not anything specifically because of the new wastewater plant. Any wastewater treatment plant should have a high-strength waste surcharge to try to help balance the costs that come from these wastes that are higher strength and therefore cost more to treat.
So actually, I meant to do this at the beginning. So I did talk to the town attorney about whether I should participate in this discussion, just because I own businesses that would be impacted by this, and he advised that it's no different than us all being residents also and also being impacted by it. So he said he did not feel, this isn't about my businesses in particular, it's about all businesses in town. And I do feel like I could be objective on this. I actually support this ordinance. I have some questions about some of the detail, but I do feel like I can participate in the discussion. Attorney did and just missed my disclosure. You can vouch for the fact that I disclose that there would be an impact to businesses that I own, but I do feel like I can be objective. So. Okay.
And then I ran a few numbers. So the average restaurant would be surcharged about $176 or $175, say approximately, per month. And that range goes from a low of $15 to a high of almost $320 per month. And that's based on their actual water usage times our projected biochemical oxygen demand rates of what they would use. And again, I would really encourage them to take that money, look at it moving forward and invest in keeping those rates really low, or keeping their demands low, well below industry averages. That's what this is set up to encourage.
Pre-treatment.
Pre-treatment.
Yeah,
do you have an estimate of what it might cost, if there is such thing, an average restaurant to install what they need to do that, if they haven't already?
Probably in the it could be less expensive for some restaurants, but an average one that would have to install this sampling port outside, probably in the $1,000 to $2,000 range.
That's just a sampling port. What about if you had to put in a grease trap or a side streaming?
Everyone's supposed to have the grease traps in.
Anyway.
So our ordinance says you've got to have the grease trap anyway, and they all do, that we know of. And we're inspecting them and having them keeping up a little more on their maintenance and inspections. So side streaming, you know, it could be inexpensive, it could be expensive, it depends on how it's set up.
And quantities.
And quantities of what they're doing. I mean, I think we did a presentation before. The easiest thing to do is like take their alcohol line, their beer taps, and run it in, pump it into a keg, and then dispose of it that way. So, and I don't think that would be very expensive. You know, a little bit on their storage and design.
So just a question on this, because I had a lot of questions about the testing as well, because I think some of that, and I don't have any idea what the port thingy really does, but I do have concerns that testing 3 times a year may not give us a true reflection of what their discharges are. Just like our town results looked really good until we hit, you know, we just randomly had a high day. I mean, if you were to test one of the brewers on a day that they're not brewing, and if it's random, how do we know we're actually getting a good sample? Because wouldn't it be better to have multiple data points over a short period of time and do, you know, something that would give us a better idea of what their typical monthly discharges look like on different days? I just worry that the random 3 times a year is kind of going to be hit or miss, and they could either come out looking much higher or much lower than they actually are on an average basis.
That is a possibility, however, on both the breweries or distillery. I've got a smarter meter, so we know when they're running the water, so we can sort of hedge that day.
But even a restaurant, so.
Okay, restaurants, yeah.
So if you go to a restaurant, and then how does this account for what actually gets consumed? Because not everything that gets poured from a water standpoint goes down the drain. I mean, so the breweries and the distillery bottle a lot of that. So if it's based on water usage, I looked into some other towns, they actually subtract how much wasn't going down the drain from their number. Because the usage of water makes the assumption that it all goes down the drain. And if you're a production facility making lots and lots of bottles and you're bottling a strong portion of that, does it inflate the number and the charge?
It could. I don't have a feel for how much is generated versus how much water they use. I saw Oscar Blues give me their numbers in Longmont, and it wasn't that significant, but we'll have to see.
Yeah, I did talk to another town, and they do account for that in their ordinance, and so that just might be something to look at. But the other thing is that the town hires the firm. I think it might go over better if the town has 3 firms on a list and they can pick which one they want, versus them saying, well, you get to pick, what if you, I just think for trust issues, so that it feels fair, that they get to select who the sampler is, would help them feel like they have some choice in that. But I think that it would be helpful to know more about and to think about this testing out, because the other question I have is, if it comes out higher, do they have to pay it the higher amount?
I was thinking not.
It doesn't say.
It doesn't really, yeah, it doesn't say.
Right, I was thinking that. I would say they're in that category.
You know, we want to, yeah, because we're dealing with what they have now, so we just want them to lower it, so I wouldn't think there'd be a penalty.
I mean,
But I think it's a fair question, that they could read this and say, well, I don't know what it would say, and if it's gonna up my rates, I'm not gonna test. So, but we wanna know, and so we wanna encourage the more, getting good data, and just so that they understand. So I think the more we can build things in that make them unwilling to look at this investment.
We were envisioning no extra charge.
So I think that's just a question that would come up. I also had these aren't really necessarily questions, I guess. I guess actually one other question is the business descriptions. It covers most of what we have in town now, but is there anything, I'm just wondering, is there any other more objective way did you look at to saying, like, anyone with a restaurant license? I mean, the FOG program I liked because it was a more objective criteria versus there's no definitions for what is a restaurant, what is a meat shop. Some might fall into more than one category, so, some statement about, the higher category always applies might be helpful too. I mean, I don't know if I don't have a necessarily suggestion, but I don't know if we've looked at some other ways that we might be able to do some descriptions there to help people know where they would actually fall. Like a hotel isn't on here. If they had a commercial kitchen, I suppose they would fit into this. But if you're a B&B, say, so would a B&B, where would that fall?
Right now, I didn't calculate it in any of the surcharges.
So, I mean, I guess the question is, do we want this to apply to all businesses regardless of what kind of business it is, or only these businesses?
I think most of them, I'm not reading it right in front, most business is gonna fall in the first category. Is it that you're the same as residential? Is that the first category that I thought there was one?
Right.
Right, and so anything that's a business reasonably expected to discharge at or below typical residential. So that's up to someone to decide, but we have a lot of code that's left up to the engineer or the town administrator. I mean, the other option, the code the way it is now, it's all up to the town administrator or the town engineer, right? We have some code in there about high strength weight and charges. It's just been this laborious process to go through all the numbers and figure all these totals. And so if you remember looking at the current code, it was something that's never been implemented because it got to be too much. So that was one where basically anybody could fall into that first category if you weren't already listed there. So I think there could be some amendments to others, but to the question of would most businesses would fall. If you're just an office, you're gonna fall in that first category, the same as residential. Where does a B&B fall? That would have to be decided.
Like, there's no industrial businesses really listed here. So
Right.
like the auto shop. Picking on, I don't wanna, but, they're washing lots of cars and they're,
They have a sand trap.
They have a sand trap. So I think we have to have some broader descriptions in this to capture more things that are listed here. I think it could be leaving out some that are contributing. Because if you don't fall into one of these categories in the low, medium, or high, then it's kind of assumed you're a standard and there's no surcharge, correct? Because you're giving them a credit for that. I guess my argument is the businesses there should be a minimum, and, I mean, unless, treat them all the same, and don't give anybody a credit. I'd take that out, and just say, we're gonna surcharge all businesses that could be contributing to higher cost for managing BOD. Unless it'd almost be easier to say who's not included in some way versus just, if you're not on this list, you must be in the standard category, is the way it currently reads to me. Does that make sense?
Yeah, to some extent, this was our first draft that we just, again, the UEB just did what we could. It all is gonna revert back to how much time and effort gets put into it, what staff can do, how much time does Joe have to work on it. Right, the UEB came and said, okay, here's this. Paid staff can take over now and do some more on it. I mean, it can come back to us again and we can try to get to it too, but, so that's where that's sort of at. That's why that was the first one we saw, and you could add more to it.
Because I know, well, okay, yeah, just another example. I mean, we know we have a food production business. We have some new industries, and they're not part of this right now, the way it's currently going.
Right, so I think that's it.
I think that, Aaron, that you mentioned that that there are other communities that have an ordinance like this, that it's more common than not. Did I remember that right?
Have a high strength waste surcharge. They don't have it in this format. I've only seen this one and maybe another one. This was adapted from one that we found. Most of them have it where they measure BOD. There's no option. You are doing whatever it takes so that the municipality can actually measure your waste. So this is sort of a method of incentivizing businesses to try to do that, to reduce some of their expenses, because we don't have the ability to now measure everybody's high strength waste. So this is a modification of just saying, we're gonna measure your waste, and we know we can do that, and then we're gonna charge you so much. This is saying we don't know how much it is, but these are some industry standards.
To add to that, a lot of times there's a consent decree with the EPA for violations of effluent. They require that type of program where the municipality will come in and monitor you, no choice.
We're not there.
Yeah, luckily we're not there.
And so that would be the installation of this monitoring. You were talking about the $2,000 to install it at each business.
Right. And then we'd have to have the sampling.
So I want to ask the board if they would be willing to maybe workshop this one, because aside from some of those things, there are a lot of other things in here, like the units and the thing don't align with the formula. Like the formula uses parts per million, the standards use milligrams per liter, and they are essentially the same thing, but it doesn't spell that out, and there's no calculation for how to get from gallons to million gallons. We can go through this and open the public hearing. I probably have 25 comments written down on this just for small. Do we have to open it, or could we?
Because it was advertised as a public hearing.
Well, we could open the public hearing.
Yeah, I mean, typically we don't have
Right.
done this. We have the public hearing and there's discussion and then there's a motion is then put forth.
To table from there.
Yeah.
I mean, I'm open to the board's desire on this. It's an important ordinance and we need to do it, but I can tell you, as a business owner, I had a hard time understanding this after several hours of trying to figure out what it would mean. So I do think, I want to get it right. I want to make sure it's clear. So whatever the board would like to do.
I'd be open to that.
So
I feel like this is long overdue. As Aaron said, the UEB has been studying this for 4 to 5 years, talking about it. The numbers that the budget reflects this ordinance just like it reflected the general wastewater increase, and I'm opposed to continuing this any longer.
okay. Well, let's open the public hearing. And if anyone would like to speak on ordinance 1000, I think this is 45. Coming up. So 4 minutes.
This is Amy Reinholtz, 141 Kelling Drive, and my comments are pretty much the same as what I said in the last ordinance. But I am concerned, again, for the appearance of conflict of interest. So in this case, I think that if somebody's spouse, Mayor Sullivan, does own a business that is this particular type of business with this particular kind of waste, I think it looks like a conflict of interest. So I'm just saying that as a citizen and as a resident. So I think that's a concern. So maybe if this is continued, that you would recuse yourself. I think that would help for a lot of trust from the public. But yeah, and also the sort of I do agree with what I heard Trustee Browning say about it's best for the trust of the public, the residents who already saw their increase approved, that they would want to see the increases to the businesses approved too, and not feel like they're taking on the burden of businesses that have a particular kind of waste that the rest of the town would not want to subsidize. So, and I know there are multiple kinds of businesses, and so, and I support businesses in town, and I think there are a lot of businesses that really are trying to do the best with whatever their particular kind of waste is. And this is only one kind of waste that affects the wastewater. So, thank you very much for hearing what I had to say.
Thank you. Anyone else?
Coco Gordon, 523 Fifth Avenue. I did a lot of research, now almost a decade now, between when we were talking about the wastewater facility and now about what impacts the wastewater facility. And I looked into all the different breweries, all the local ones, all the ones around, even throughout the entire United States. And I'd say that in almost all of them, when not just breweries, but any business that has alcohol, pH, different things that contribute to the BOD, they have to, in almost all other places, towns, cities, have to do their own kind of pretreatment first. And that's required before they even become a business. But now, the problem is, again, when you inherit something that's already there, what do? Because then you have to consider, as a board, what makes the business stay, how will you lose the business? So it's tricky. So once again, I have to leave the discussions of how you do it to the people who are making decisions in the town. But I think it's never too late to try to get the least expensive options out to the businesses that have these problems, that are contributing to the problems. And they could be over a larger, wider way of doing pretreatment. There are different kinds of things that include composting on site, removal of the offending BOD effluent that's going into the wastewater facility, never even sending it there, chucking it out. Things that they can do on their own. If there can be some education maybe that are showing, or even having maybe a different commission taking that on as far as the sustainable elements of it that we're not taking into consideration with the numbers and the way of doing the kind of side streaming that's being done, thought about with the UEB, maybe bring it to a different group that can come up with a solution, some solutions that they can work with some of the existing businesses and have them do their other kind of side streaming on the site with plants and with plantings and with certain ways of doing it right there and not having it ever be a problem to go into the wastewater facility. It's just a thing I bring up because it's my specialty that I know can be done, and I just wanted to bring it to your attention. So maybe there's some other possibilities of solving the problems.
Thank you. Anyone else?
It's got three of us. Laverne Johnson, 306 Evans. Myself, I don't want to recuse Mayor because she's got 25 questions. And that will take her questions, won't it? And if she leaves her questions, maybe she can sit out in another room, but I don't actually have any cause of recusing her because she doesn't use that much water herself. So that's my thought.
I'll correct you a few things. Anyone else? Thank you. All right, I'm going to close the public hearing. I do want to address a couple of the comments. I guess the first one, I appreciate the appearances, but I also think that the conflict of interest rules are clear. While our business will be impacted by this, so will every other business in town. And I do think it's important to have people who are knowledgeable and understand how this is going to impact businesses participate in the discussion. I'm certainly very sensitive to all of that, and it's not something we take lightly. I have talked to the town attorney about this. We talked about, I had originally asked about whether I needed to do that, and again, the comparison was you're a resident and you're impacted by residential rates, just the same as everybody else on the board, and we participate in that. But I am sensitive to the appearances. I do also want to, I think the comment by Coco is a really important one, and one of the things I'm trying to bring up here is the way this was written, it's based on water usage. And someone who side streams will get no credit for that in this ordinance. So it's not going to incentivize necessarily what we think it's going to. Because even if you side stream that waste, the calculation of the cost is on your water usage. Right? Mm-hmm. So if you side stream, which I believe some of the businesses are doing already to try to mitigate the BOD, they're still going to get charged the same amount as if they don't. So we're not actually incentivizing them to side stream because their rates won't go down unless they do the testing. And I'm not convinced that 3 random samples are necessarily going to give us a good enough picture about whether they've successfully lowered their BOD. I'm actually advocating for a higher, stricter standard to get out of these charges for our businesses. So I'm a big advocate. I know we need this, but I don't think we have an ordinance in front of us that actually incentivizes what we're trying to get to. What it's going to do is it's going to charge everyone. Yeah. No one's going to be able to do the testing, or the testing may mislead us into changing their rates, and we're not going to solve our problem. So
unless you consider the standard, right? If you fall in the standard category, you're at 250 minus the 250 allowance is 0, so you have no surcharge.
And I'm actually arguing we should take that piece out because I think every business potentially, and that's where I think if we had better descriptions of the businesses that are included in this, and you don't give them the baseline of 250 to get out. If your business is on this list, you are going to have a surcharge. You can't just say I'm 0, because we don't have enough businesses and all the activities in town listed here to accurately capture all the businesses that are contributing to this. We've got a lot of them, but we don't have necessarily all of them.
I would go with that route, yeah. Put all the businesses on there that you want, because you don't want an office who's doesn't have any BOD, right? You do want the office to fall into the standard category.
I think I would prefer we exempt some businesses potentially and list who's exempted and then categorize the rest, but categorize them on whether they have a retail food service license or in the FOG program or in an industrial zone potentially, or some objective ways to maybe put people into some categories. And then I agree, give them some opportunities to try to show that they could move to a lighter category. These are just one-time limits. That's the other thing. Each category might need to go to a range versus just a single limit. So what if I'm under 1,000, or if I'm 1225, what do I pay then? Where do I fall? I'm just saying there are some structural problems with this ordinance to help us implement it.
Well, I thought it doesn't say that if you, so first you're gonna be in the category, and there's no measurement, right? We don't have any idea what you're doing, you're just in that category. Only if you actually do something to start measuring will we ever know what your actual are.
Right, but the category has a number that's in the formula that determines how much I pay.
Right, so you're trying to get below that, and if you decide you want to go measure, then we go with your actual.
If it's lower.
Right, but I'm saying, okay, so say I measure and I come out at 700.
Then you're
I'm
at
not,
700.
so I just pay the 1,000?
No, you're
No,
at 700, you pay the
standard.
actual, because all we're trying to do is get, so we know everybody's actual. If we knew everybody's actual in town, we would no longer need this.
I see, okay, so if I come out at 1,250, you're still only gonna charge me 1,000.
Mm-hmm.
So it's gonna basically say, well, if you don't come out higher,
I wouldn't have expected us to have anybody in a category come in higher. If we don't have that right, then something's wrong. I would expect the only option to be lower, but that's something, that I think is something that has to be looked into and thought about if people come in higher.
well, and it does seem like there's a big gap between high and medium.
Yes,
You
because
know,
high
that
was
gap
very
seems
high,
big.
and high could actually be 5 times higher in some of the others. Trying to get ones who are extremely high versus high. So again, going by industries, there are some industries that might be 10 to 20 times more. I guess the base start too is that the basic premise is we're trying to get the money to cover what we see as high-strength waste from business, right? So we're trying to get whatever that number is, and then it's trying to fairly allocate that among the businesses based on their waste, or how much we think they're actually contributing. So if it's 50,000, of that, the business community is paying 50,000 in total, and we're trying to figure out a way to equitably distribute that cost among the businesses based on what their high-strength waste is. And the way we had come about that is the idea that there are these industrial categories that say, well, industries have this average and this average and this average, only because we can't go out and measure it. So if we could measure it, we wouldn't have to worry about it, then we would get the actual numbers. We can't, so we're using the industry standard to try to fairly distribute that 50,000 charge amongst the businesses based on how much their waste is costing the plant. That's the goal, at least.
So it almost sounds like we said, well, we need to make this much money, so let's write an ordinance so we can back into making that much money.
The only thing I backed into was $1.13. The rest of this ordinance is an industry standard. So it's.
But and that is what it's based, that's what
Yeah.
Longmont has, what they think their high-strength waste costs the plant, and then they base their per pound.
That's how you do it.
Because you're trying to match that amount, because that's the cost the businesses are putting on the plant over and above an average user.
So the rate would increase, change annually?
We can,
It could.
So,
when you
okay.
do your rate studies.
So, okay, that's helpful, but I still think we're not necessarily writing a very, it's not, I think it needs to be fair. And nobody's arguing we shouldn't have the businesses pay. But it should be a fair ordinance, and it should make sure it captures everybody who's actually contributing to the problem. And I don't think this does that. I think that, you know, I would like to have seen something that was a little bit more comprehensive, I guess, in terms of the businesses listed.
Are you proposing we go through the permits of who's a business in town and start there? Because what you're asking is kind of opposite of things we've done in the past, is we don't want to overburden some of our rules with endless lists of whatever they can change on a yearly basis. Said, when somebody invents something new, starts a new business. I'm kind of just playing it devil's advocate
No,
here.
Mayor
agree.
Sullivan, if I may,
Yeah.
I think we're having a discussion between the board, we should probably have a motion.
Okay, I'm trying to remember if we closed, did I close? I
You
think
did,
we
you did.
Okay, we can have a motion on the floor, go ahead. Thank you.
I move that we approve ordinance 1045 ordinance for high-strength waste surcharge and pretreatment.
I'll second.
So I guess just to pick up on your question, I guess I'm just saying, is there a better way to, like, there's no headers on, I just feel like there's not enough here for a business to read this and understand how to apply it necessarily. And I also think there would be a lot of businesses say, I don't fit into any of these lists, how does this impact me? Does it impact me, or am I just off the hook? I mean, it doesn't say what to do if you are a business that's not on this list. And I don't think defaulting to say that they should just be exempt because we'll assume their standard is the right approach. And I don't actually think there should be any exemption for a standard. And actually talking to some wastewater engineers, the standard is actually 300 to 350 today, rather than 250. So I think that the number is even low. But I would actually not give them credit for that. I would actually just have a business, maybe a low rate for a business, for somebody that's like offices or something like that. I mean, they have, yeah, I don't know. I'm open to that discussion, but I wish that this had been written in a way that made sure that we really were applying this universally. That's all. Mayor Hutchinson?
I was, as you were talking, I was wondering if there could be an administrative process for adding additional businesses to a category, so that, you know, if a new business came to town, you know, whether it's, you know, an engineer looks at it and does calculations and then adds them to a category and reports that to the board. So that because I had the same kind of concern that whenever you have a static list like that, it's almost immediately after something comes up that doesn't fit the static list. So there ought to be some kind of mechanism, some process that would enable you know, there to be really a universal method for identifying what category of business would go in.
Trustee Trice said to respond to that, I mean, one way to accomplish that goal is the ability for the engineer in this situation to pass it, or to promulgate administrative regulations enforcing the code. I think there actually may be in the existing code a provision for that, but that's one of the changes we were looking to make, and part of the larger utility code changes was a greater ability, at least more clear ability, in order to promulgate administrative regulations.
I just have a question about where gas stations would fit in. Do you know?
Yeah, I consider them equal to any other restaurant, you know, it's just normal waste type thing. They generally don't even have grease traps. So they're just like a normal, people use the
Convenience
bathrooms
store.
and that's it, yeah. Any other retail store.
Okay.
Why, I guess, why are coffee shops in the medium category? That would surprise me.
Coffee.
Because of cream?
Cream's a high.
No, I think the coffee.
Is BOD too. Anything organic. Anything organic.
Excuse pH.
And plus sugars. People are
Just like
putting more sugar
sodas
in
and
drinks.
beer. That's why restaurant sodas.
But I would agree that the list, right, you either need to have some way to add them in or add more to it. Just as my word. For me, it's always a cost-benefit analysis. How much am I gonna push back on staff? Because my group already feels overwhelmed and is telling me I'm taking on too much. And so I give it to staff to try to overdo stuff, but then I know staff is way overwhelmed.
What about taking a matrix similar to our zoning code that lists all the businesses, and right now there's the, you know, primary, or use by right, and then there's a conditional use, and doing a low, high, medium, based on the types of businesses listed in the zoning code.
Trustee Karas?
We've discussed this before and other things. It sounds like we're trying to reinvent the wheel. If this is coming from industry standards, I'm sure this exact issues that have brought up are answered in other towns' codes. Businesses,
Not
industries, how
that
they're
easy.
listed.
I haven't found that many.
Seriously?
Because most are going on the actual numbers.
Which is
That's
testing
been the
every
sticky
business.
point. for the years now is that they're just measuring. They're forcing you to have it and taking the measurements on a regular basis.
If you're in
There's
a
some, you
commercial or
can find
industrial
some, I can,
zoning.
but I didn't find overwhelming amounts like I thought I might.
So I have another question too about the clause that says if you're a new commercial customer and you don't fall into the standard category, you must have the required equipment installed to allow monitoring of wastewater. So does that mean that the new, whatever goes into the old Farmer Girls site has to install that equipment to get their license?
That's what I thought we were trying to do, yeah.
You're gonna start implementing it.
I thought we almost already did with the quarry, having requirements in that aspect.
Do we know what it was, I mean, do we know what the cost really will be if it gets an old infrastructure on Main Street to install this equipment?
I don't.
You said 1 to 2,000?
Yeah, that's assuming we can get it downstream of the we have to separate the normal drain waste from the business portion of that. So assuming we have a sampling point, it wouldn't be bad at all.
So, yeah, it's hard for me to understand like what that really means. So I guess I'm just concerned that if we do that and in some of the older parts of town, becomes cost prohibitive to do that. Because why couldn't they just go into the categories above and be like everyone else? Because if they have to install something that gets prohibitively expensive, then we deter new business.
To be honest with you, I was thinking of applying the 50% rule to that. If their improvements were more than 50% of the value of the structure, then that would cue that in. If they were just doing a remodel of the restaurant, just fixing things, they wouldn't be required to do that unless it made economic sense to them.
Because I know there was at one time, forget someone was looking at one of the businesses and they would have had to upgrade the grease trap or something, and it was literally gonna be $10,000, $15,000 because of the location of that business. And just not knowing what this means and what this looks like, I mean, maybe it's really as simple as you say. If it's $1,000 investment, fine, and that's not a big deal. Especially when you add up how much is this gonna cost a business, it would make perfect sense for them to do that. Assuming the testing would show they are really lower. But if you're brand new and you're coming in, I don't know if the assumption seems to be that it's going to be a fairly low cost investment. And I don't know if that's always true.
I like the idea that it at least forces them to question, because I think right now people are coming in, right, and then someone buys something and they have no idea that there's even these concerns out there, and then they really get stuck like they are now, coming back saying, wait, I never knew this even was an issue with my business. So somehow, I agree that so part of it is that's almost the goal, is to make people start questioning and understanding themselves what they're getting into as a business, trying to make sure they understand all the costs before they just decide to do it. Because we had talked at some point of almost working this out, that we give you so many years, but like some of the other things, when you want to get the change, within 5 years, every business has to have it, no matter what. But again, that maybe is not wanted to be done because it does get cost prohibitive. But then we don't know what we have going into the wastewater.
So the way you have this set up currently is that if you fall into the standard, you have no surcharge. Because the 250, you get the 250 credit. When you go down to the calculation, I think this calculation is a fairly complex one for some to figure out. It doesn't tell you anywhere how to go from 10,000 gallons to 0.01 in the formula. I would actually, to simplify this calculation, remove the 250 credit, because it just takes, I think this calculation is really hard to figure out from the way it's written here. So I would take the 1,500, get rid of the minus 250, and basically say, you know, we have to spell this out to give them specific instructions on how to do this. So, and then the 1,500, you have it in parts per million in the formula, but up above, nowhere in the chart do you show parts per million. So first, they're going to start off saying, where's my parts per million? It's in milligrams per liter. You know what I'm saying?
Mm-hmm.
So I think the chart needs to match the formula. And then I think that you need a step to show how to go from the gallons and make sure that that's clear, that that comes from your utility bill and it's water usage. And that you have to show that step as well, how to turn that into million gallons for the formula, because the only way this all works to get to pounds is if they use the right units. And then I just think that you have to go step by step by step. So I'm happy to work through this tonight and we can start offering the amendments. But I just want the board to appreciate that this is not very straightforward. And I think we're going to have a lot of businesses paying a huge amount, and we're going to have some businesses paying nothing that are probably contributing, unless we make some changes. Happy for all businesses to pay their share and get to the number. I want this to be a component of this, and I'm fully supportive of it, but I would like to see it improved. That's all. So I can start.
And I would leave it that that's gonna be on staff, some of those changes.
Well, sure, but if you, yeah, of course we'd make those changes.
Well, if the board approves the amendments, then we would make the change. If not, then we'll leave it as is.
Do you want to do what we've done in the past, is you take all your concerns to staff, rewrite it, and come back next meeting with it?
Well, my suggestion originally, this is why I suggested we have a workshop. Because I think if we go through and if you feel like there are changes that we should make, it would be easier to do this in a workshop, because I think I can try to do individual amendments for each one, and I'm happy to do that. Because I don't want to be perceived as trying to delay this. So I'm happy to go through them one by one. I have pretty copious notes, so if you'd like, I can do that.
Mayor Sullivan, perhaps you could just bring your motion for a continuance, is that's what you desire, and see what the board's desire is.
I'm not going to be the one to offer that, so I'm going to push forward unless anyone else wants to offer that, because I'm trying to be sensitive of the perception. So
I'm willing to, let's see, move to a date certain.
December 3rd.
December 3rd.
Wouldn't it have to be it would have to be the following month meeting,
because
17th?
we can workshop it on the 3rd.
Because we had the workshop at.
Oh, got ya.
You're right.
So I would move to continue the ordinance to a date certain, December 17, and would we workshop it on December 3rd?
Yes.
And, I mean, I actually stated this a couple of meetings back, that I would have preferred to hit these one meeting at a time, because they are all really comprehensive. So I'm just standing by my original feeling of I'd like a little bit more time to delve into each one of them, and this will give us all the time to do that.
I'll second that.
Is there further discussion? I'm sorry to make this painful, but I think that this is important to the businesses. I really do. It's not, and it's important to the town to get this right. I mean, I think it needs to be well thought out. And I think this is a great start. I do appreciate you guys finally getting this to us.
Yeah.
It is long overdue. No one's arguing that. But I don't think, sometimes you don't know what it's going to look like until it shows up. And I actually think it could be improved to make this really fair and make sure we get the revenue out of it that we need for the town and incentivize the right things.
I would just say that what the town attorney said is correct. There is existing authority in the town code, specifically section 13-120 for the town administrator. And of course you can delegate that to do regulations necessary to permit administration of the chapter. They can also, the Board of Trustees can also adopt rules and regulations apart from code changes. I think a lot of the technical details of this ordinance probably belong with staff. They have a greater expertise than we do. And I think that we should rely on those provisions of the code and the staff's expertise. And I don't think that we need to hash them all out in item by item at the board level. When I say staff, I would also include the UED in that.
I would exclude the UAB. I mean, we'd be happy to do the workshop.
No, I know.
but the rewriting of the code,
We got that.
All right, yes, trustee Terry?
Just re-clarify, we're doing this route, because the other option is individual testing every business in town,
If,
right?
if they want to challenge what category they're in.
I'm saying if we don't go this
Yeah,
route, the other
if we
way,
don't go with ranges, correct.
Yes.
go with ranges.
Then-
We've discussed this current board, previous board, staff's time, attorney's time, dollar amounts. Staff have an opinion which way's less expensive, short term, long run? Scrapping this, going individual testing and doing that way, or staying this route
For the
for
businesses? Staff?
for the town, for our budget, for time,
Going this
dollars?
This route?
Yeah. Hands down.
Okay.
Yeah, and just to get clear, I'm actually really in favor of this. I've been pushing
Oh, I'm
for
not saying,
this.
I'm just,
I think this is good.
We've
I just
discussed-
think it's a little too lean on the categories, that's all. Yeah, no, I would not want us to go to
The
the,
other
back to the trying to, we can't do it. And we haven't been collecting any money because we can't do it. We gotta start collecting something for this. I'm totally in agreement with that. But I do think it has to be detailed. I think if you are impacted by this, you have a right to know what to expect. If you're looking to open a business, you need to be able to calculate what that expense might be and pro forma that. And there's just too many in here that I think won't be able to do that or understand it. And I'm not even arguing the dollars, I'm not arguing the units. I'm arguing understandable and application. That's it. Any other comments? We'll call for the vote on the motion to continue it until December 17th. Motion passes 5-1. Thank you. Will the clerk please introduce the next item?
I like this, get my stuff ready, I get lost in here. So this will be a public hearing for 1046, an ordinance of the Town of Lyons amending Article 4 of Chapter 13 of the Lyons Municipal Code for other miscellaneous amendments to the wastewater utility service.
All right, is there a staff report for this one?
The Utilities and Engineering Board did a fairly thorough review of the existing code for this section. And these are the recommendations they're making to bring it in line with what they're hoping to do with the water and the electric rates in the future. So this is just the modified things to bring it in line with their, with where they want all the ordinances to go, if that helps.
cleanup of the code, right?
Mhm.
All right, any questions for staff on this one?
I have one question related to, is this consistent with the way the auditors view the funds, the enterprise funds? Does it make any
Some of the
difference?
code for the actual enterprise listing that's in there. So that's the only thing I can see that would have anything with the auditor would be the mentioning of it as an enterprise fund.
Well, the auditors look at the water and sanitation funds combined. Does this change that? It's a simple question.
Oh, I don't think so.
This is wastewater utilities and enterprise is all we're saying, which is consistent with how it's operated.
Any other questions? Okay, we'll open the public hearing for, ordinance 1046. Would you like to comment on this one? All right, close the public hearing. Is there a motion?
Beating us down.
I'll move to approve ordinance 1046, an ordinance of the Town of Lyons, Colorado, amending Article 4 of Chapter 13 of the Lyons Municipal Code for the purpose of other miscellaneous amendments to the wastewater utility service code.
Is there a second?
I'll second that.
Any further discussion on this one?
I would try to add an amendment that we not include section 13.480 high-strength waste surcharge since we don't relate it. I don't think we want to pass it in this since it reads exactly as
Yep.
what we were questioning.
This
so-
assumed that the high strength waste charge would be passed. I mean, I think we'd admit to take that out. Well, I mean, what the actual ordinance does, it does not include, does not have the high strength. Only the exhibit does to show you what it would look like once the whole code is done. So by you passing the ordinance, it would not add in that section.
Thank you.
I was gonna say, it still could be passed as is.
Correct,
right?
correct. The exhibits are only for,
Okay.
to show you what it would look like as what the code is symbol as a whole.
Okay. Any further discussion? Hearing none, I'll call for the vote. Alright, that one passes 6-0. Next item?
Is a public hearing for Resolution 2018-101, a resolution designating and setting aside reserve increases, defining enterprise funds, and declaring emergency reserves.
Is there a staff presentation for this one?
And to come for the public comment.
Review. I can hear you. So do I need to read?
Yes, staff pres, well, just summary.
Summary of it. Just read the resolution designating, setting aside reserves increases, defining enterprise funds, and declaring emergency reserves. So this is just a resolution as required by Tabor, so to place restrictions on local government revenues and expenditures.
Does anybody have any questions for staff? Okay, no questions, we'll open the public comment for resolution 2018-101. And we'll close public comment. Is there a motion?
I'll move to approve resolution 2018-101.
Is there a second?
I'll second that.
Any further discussion? All right, I'll call for vote. Passes 6-0. Next item?
The public hearing for Resolution 2018-102, a resolution summarizing revenues and expenditures for each fund and adopting a budget for the town of Lyons, Colorado for the calendar year beginning on the first day of January 2019 and ending on the last day of December 2019.
So here's just the presentation for the expenditures, of total of $21,702,539, and for the revenues, a total of $22,544,623.
Any other questions for staff? I just have one question on the sanitation fund.
Thank you. Sorry.
Should we show the fact that we're transferring money in for the balance rather than showing that it's not?
Is it on the revenue or on the expenditure side?
Well, it's showing that the revenues are less than the expenses. Do those, so you show it without the general fund, or without the transfer from reserve?
No, we show it as a, 733,300.
So it's not showing balanced the way that it's portrayed in the resolution.
It should count the reserves as revenue.
Because I would have expected, yeah, them to say that it was same revenue, same expense. Wasn't sure if it had to be that way.
On the sanitation fund. Do you have it handy?
Yeah, but it has the 733 and the 779.
The latest version. 779,084.
That's expenditure.
Mhm. No, yeah, that's expenditures. And revenues are 733, so it's showing a negative 47 transfer. You're right, I think it should. I think they should both say 779.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So that way
You
we're
should show
we're
that
appropriating the reserve.
as a revenue. Good catch.
Okay, any other questions for staff?
I have a question. I wasn't here for the budget. Did you guys do budget last Wednesday? Again?
We workshopped it.
Yeah, and I was sick. I thought so, but then I didn't see it on there. Did you guys approve the Goodwill Fund?
I believe it was in there, yes.
Okay, I don't see it on here, that's why I'm asking.
It's,
Let's see.
Should be under health.
Yeah, I see. Oh, I see it.
Donation.
Yeah, donation, okay.
Okay.
Just making sure it is.
Any other questions? Okay, I'll open the public hearing for this one.
What I actually came to talk about now that I thought I was gonna talk about 3 hours ago. I just wanted to, Aaron Kaplan, 1007 Steamboat Valley Road. I just wanted to comment and give a thank you to Jim for what works great for me. I really like the operating breakout in the tops, at least from what I can see, the change there to look at operating. I would emphasize, a lot of it's already been talked about, that you also look at total revenue and total so that you can see the full picture, because there is no entry that says total difference. You have the operating revenue or gain, but you don't have a total gain or minus. So just make sure you look at both numbers, and you'll see, as we saw with the wastewater, that there is something there. We talked about a little bit the electric fund, and so I wanted to point out, when you guys were mentioning the 100,000 or the 300,000, that anyone looking at the previous years, you'll see they were way surplus, because we had already budgeted 100,000 for 16, 17, and 18 for these meters. And that's something I hadn't seen before, but that the UEB went and specifically tried to budget and plan ahead and save this money up so that we can now spend it rather than spend it before we have it. So it's a means that looking for things in the future, I don't know if that can be done, but also that's why there's somewhat of a big surplus in it. The little, mean gave some, but having 100,000 not spent on expenses for 3 years gives us 300,000. And the last one was, what we had mentioned, that I think the loans would be considered, from my point of view, operating expenses and not something that comes out of fund balance. When you look at those, I saw all of them, it says loan is out of fund balance, and that puts it in the same category sort of as capital improvements. And when I look at the utility fund, I include the loan with the actual operating expenses, and capital improvements separate to be spent from the investment fund.
Thank you. Anyone else?
Well, officially you should, but that's why we can't.
I don't know, I have the dash connection, because you're buying.
Me, yeah.
You're buying it.
I live right down to 3067 with the museum, and I want to thank the board for the grant that they give the museum, and for the extra money on the minimum wage, and that 5-year code thing we have to do, which is going to be done next Thursday, so they can wait a month for their money. But we do want to say that the museum has done well, and we have a lot of visitors, and we have a lot of people seeking their heritage, and had a lot of good programs. Next year, we're going to celebrate our 40th year of being open from 1979. And we saved the museum in 1976 with a 3-way lease with the school district. And so we have some vivacious people there that have had experience, and so that's really nice. So we appreciate your help. Thank you.
Thank you. All right, we'll close the public hearing. Is there a motion? And I would suggest if you would like to include the correction in the sanitation fund estimated revenues with the original motion, so action.
I'll move to approve resolution 2018-102 with the following change. In section 3, the estimated revenue for the sanitation fund should be $779,084 to match the expenditure in section 2.
Is there a second?
I'll second that.
Any further discussion? Trustee Brown?
A couple of comments I'd like to make on the budget. One relates to something I asked earlier that we've talked about this at the workshop too. I think we're all a little bit uncomfortable with the projected operating surplus of only $69,152 in the budget. That's cutting it pretty close. However, I think there are a couple of things that may mitigate that. One is what we talked about during the financials earlier. It looks like we're going to be somewhere around $175,000 surplus in sales tax projected collections this year, and that would add to the fund balance to begin the year, so it doesn't affect the $69,000 number for next year, other than you're starting from a higher point with cushion. Also related to that is that the sales tax projection number we have in the 2019 budget, Trustee Drystad and I both tried to kind of do projection. We came up real close, and that number that both of us came up with is also almost exactly what the year-end projection will be for 2018 sales taxes. Sales taxes have gone up year to year during all the recent years since the flood. That's no guarantee it'll happen next year. We could be in a recession by mid-year, who knows. But if the trend we've seen in the last 4 or 5 years continues, the sales tax projection for next year is probably conservative, as it probably should be. So I think that there is some cushion there above the $69,000 net cash flow. And the other point is something that also discussed at the workshop that I wanted to put on the record here. I went through the budget and came up in categories that I labeled tourism, business promotion, and town beautification. I came up with a total of about $214,000 of items we will be budgeting for next year. Each and every one of those items is beneficial to the town. They're things that are good to do. You can't say, I don't believe, reasonably say that any of those is really a waste of money by any stretch of the imagination. They're all good things to do. However, I went through the budget and told all of the items that relate to street maintenance and improvement, and came up with a total of $80,000 roughly, compared to the $214,000 in those other categories of tourism, beautification, and business promotion. I don't have changes to propose in this year's budget for that, but I would suggest going forward, beginning next year, that we seriously relook at those priorities, because I don't think those priorities reflect what most citizens of Lyons would say our priorities should be. Our streets are in bad shape. They need something, many of them need something other than just routine patching. I think we need to reconsider our priorities for next year, and similar to what Aaron Kaplan just said about paying for the new electric meters, we need to figure out a way to start saving for some major street improvements in Lyons. There's several ways to do big improvements like that. One is a bond issue that requires raising taxes in a vote. Another thing that comes to mind is when we get to the magical point of, we hope, not having to use all of the reserves that we've been doing each year at $200,000 per year to protect against clawbacks from our flood recovery grants, that might be a source of a capital improvements fund for streets. But even in the year-to-year budgets, I think beginning next year, we need to figure out a way to address our deteriorating streets and lines and to kind of rethink our priorities. Thank you.
So I kind of don't disagree with Trustee Browning. I think I would just remind everyone that unfortunately we had to take $70,000 out of the budget from transportation tax that did not pass. So that would have contributed significantly. And then I also think, I mean, while it may be being presented to try to present that we're focused more on economic development and say, well, that's not benefiting the town, I think we need to be reminded that 1% of all of the sales tax we generate in the town is what's funding our parks. And so, you know, it is important to make sure that we have economic development. The other thing is that we were able to not raise property tax for the first time in I don't know how many consecutive years, because we are finally reaching a point where sales tax is driving more of our business and general fund functions to where we can start to maybe hold property taxes level, and that will benefit all the citizens in town. Yeah, so I think that we're seeing a shift in our town and becoming more of a tourism economy. And I think that that's been a goal of the towns for a really long time, to get to a point to where we can sustain our operations on sales tax and our property tax base without having to rely on one-time fees from development, which we will have very limited going forward. So I agree that I wish the net income, this is probably one of the lowest ones we've had, but I also do expect that, like we have in past years, will probably come in better than what we're projecting in the general fund. So because we do have a lot of significant capital improvements this year, we're not setting aside quite as much, but we are also still contributing $200,000 to potential flood. There's a little nest egg there for flood take-backs that I think is still important, which that money may eventually become available to us, and I think that is where we could take on a large project somewhere. And I do think, you know, we use a lot of our own town staff to do a lot of the street maintenance and some of these improvements, so there's a lot of salary costs there too. But not necessarily disagreeing, but I'm just saying it's not like, oh, we're doing economic development and there's no payoff for that except for that we're not fixing our streets. And I don't know that that's a fair representation of what's in this budget. I think the town's doing a lot of really good things for the community. I think, you know, and we've had a strong financial performance, and I expect the same next year as well. So I will support the budget as written.
You know, a comment, and this goes back to some of the information provided by the town administrator in the administrative report that supports at this point in time, the strong performance that, while no guarantee, but does support the likelihood that we won't have to use all of that $200,000 we've been saving. And I recall the discussion we had at the time we instituted the $200,000, which was that if we didn't have to use it, that's exactly what we would do, is put it into a CIP. I mean, that was the original intent. And I do think, even though as a general rule, I don't like the notion of highly conservative budgets because sometimes it means you know somebody doesn't get to do what they could have done if it wasn't conservative, and that you know sometimes budgets get padded on the expense side and shorter on the revenue side. That's not really a good thing, because you don't get done what you plan to do. It should be right on. You should be as straightforward as possible. Having said that, I do personally think that sales tax is one area where being conservative does make some sense. So I'll support the budget.
Any other comments? All right, I'll call for the votes on resolution 2018-102. And it's approved 6-0. Next item.
Is public hearing for resolution 2018-103, a resolution appropriating sums of money to the various funds and the amount and for the purpose as set forth below for the town of Lyons, Colorado for the 2000, I wrote 18 budget year, it's for 19.
Is this 18? Oh, yeah.
Where?
It's just I have 18 written there in my title.
Oh, in your title?
Yeah.
Ours says 2019. Okay, ours is correct.
Yeah, yours is right, mine's wrong on my agenda.
And this does have the sanitation fund. Oh, that's expenditures again.
So this one is just all the, you know, each of the funds just broken down by operating, either have all the expenditures and the capital outlay in the debt service. And I can just mention the totals. For the total general fund is $2,620,032. For the electric fund is $1,779,160. For the water fund is a total of $1,077,848. For sanitation fund, $1,391,172. For sanitation fund, $1,018,515. For the grant fund,
That's the sanitation.
is $50,505,000. Conservation Trust Fund, $15,000. And for the Parks Rec and Cultural Fund, $954,658.
And just, for the record, the, what was distributed has the correct total, label for the total of the Parks, Rec, and Cultural Fund. So
Oh, it says
on the
grant
computer,
here.
it says total grant fund. It's just a little typo.
Yeah, that's all we can make the changes.
I made the change and gave the new ones to
Yeah, what was handed out is correct.
Oh,
Yeah.
Okay. All right, any questions for staff?
not this.
Okay, we'll open the public comment for resolution 2018-103. Would anyone like to comment on this resolution? All right, we'll close public comment. Is there a motion? Do we have a motion?
Move to approve resolution 2018-103, resolutions appropriating the funds.
I'll second.
Any further discussion? I'll call for the vote. Carries 6-0. Final item for public hearings.
This will be a public hearing for resolution 2018-104, a resolution levying general property taxes for the year 2018 to help defray the cost of government for the town of Lyons, Colorado for the 2019 budget year.
So this, and I don't know if Victoria mentioned, but this is based on the last, where we got the information from the treasurer's office, and it might change, but we're not gonna receive it until tomorrow, or maybe after tomorrow. So maybe some of these numbers might have changed, but so far it says whereas the amount of money necessary to balance the budget for general operating purposes is $2,433,532. And where we have the 2018 net valuation for assessment for the town of Lyons certified by the county assessor is at this time $37,305,698.
And no change in the mills.
Any questions?
No changes, I'm sorry.
So this is done so that it keeps
The mill's flat.
Yes.
those flat. So I would move for passage of resolution 2018-104, resolution levying general property taxes for the year. That should be for 2019, correct?
Well, it's 18.
It's the taxes collected in 2018 that
Or
go towards our
19.
2019
Yeah.
budget.
This is the weird one.
Yeah,
Every
things
year,
so complex,
2018
don't
to
they?
help defray the cost billing for the
Yeah, they
town of
do.
Lyons, Colorado, for the 2019 budget year. Got it, okay. With the proviso that the numbers mentioned in the whereas clauses may be adjusted by town staff to meet the amounts actually provided by for the town.
I'll second that.
Any further discussion? Hearing none, call for the vote.
We didn't have, didn't open a public hearing?
Oh, I didn't. I didn't?
It's not on this one.
Oh, God, lost track. Okay, apologize. We're gonna back up.
Sure.
and Public hearing. We're all running together at this
Yeah.
point. Is there anyone like to speak to this property tax resolution? Resolution 2104, okay. Now we'll close the hearing. We'll call for the vote one more time. We already have our motion, but, okay. Now it passes 6-0. Thank you. Sorry about that. Okay, will the clerk please read the items on consent and to the record, please?
The first reading for ordinance 1048, an ordinance of the town of Lyons amending certain sections of chapter 16 of the Lyons Municipal Code, creating definitions for large and small for accessory structures and creating a conditional use permit requirement for large accessory structures in some low-density residential zones. And the resolution 2018-100, a resolution of the town of Lyons ratifying the decision made by the Board of Trustees at their regular meeting on November 5th, 2018 to uphold and overturn the building inspector's decision concerning the property at 401 2nd Avenue, Lyons, Colorado, pursuant to the Lyons Municipal Code. Resolution 2018-105, a resolution of the town of Lyons awarding the bid for the Public Works Facility Replacement Building and approving the construction agreement with Hershey Construction. Resolution 2018-107, a resolution of the town of Lyons accepting public improvements for the McConnell Bridge and closeout of of construction contracts with Zach Dirt. The November 18th accounts payable and the November 5th Board of Trustees meeting minutes.
Would anyone like to pull any items from consent?
Full resolution 2018-105, number 3. And can I just ask a clarification question on number 4? That it mentioned in the documents about, you gave us a punch list, but never stated, I'm assuming the punch list has been completed? That's it, thank you.
All right, is there a motion to approve the remaining items on consent?
So moved.
Any further discussion? I'm sorry, second?
I'll second.
Lost here, sorry. Any further discussion? I'll call for the vote. All right, those are approved 6-0. We don't have any items for general business, so we'll start with your item number 3, resolution 2018-105.
That's nice.
Just the contractor, name sounds familiar, we used him before, have we not?
Yeah, they did Bone Park, or not
No.
Bone Park, Meadow Park,
Meadow
Phase
Park.
2.
Hershey did, yeah.
Well, the contract was Meadow Park.
Just kind of remind my colleagues on the board, we had problems with engineering, architectural numbers, things getting out of whack.
Yep.
General contractors are to stay on top of that themselves too, and let the people they work for, which is town of Lyons, know and help us out. I just have a slight concern is all. Sir. So please watch it closely. So, just wanted to make that statement.
All right, is there a motion to approve the resolution?
I move to approve the resolution 2018-105.
I'll second.
Any further discussion? Okay, I'll call for the vote. And it passes 6-0. Trustee reports? Gonna run around?
I'll go real quick.
Anything?
UEB, you haven't heard a lot of it. Will not be meeting this week. College board had another lengthy meeting. Again, Steve has done a wonderful job. He's great patience. The last several meetings have gone, the 2 hours are usually taken up by the subgroup. think they've got it whittled down to, might, hopefully, next meeting, get something passed at the college board that will ask staff, instead of trying to rewrite ordinances and everything, that maybe the board can ask staff to implement just a couple things based on policies that the park director already has in place to satisfy, and we'll see how it goes from there.
We've been trying to get the ecology board to come and give a presentation for a while.
He just keeps putting it off.
I think the one question I have is just, there seems to be a proposal to where they would become an approving body for the pesticides, and I think we need to make sure
That was discussed in this last meeting. There's a couple members of that subgroup that seem to think the way they read the ordinances that they are given carte blanche powers to regulate the town of Lyons, what it does, and there's a couple words in there that say they can advise or they make recommendations, so.
Also, just watching that they're not having any meetings in their emails, and they've been reminded about that as well, that that's not the format to be having these in-depth discussions, that it needs to be during the meetings, so.
Yeah, if it's, if they need any direction, or you probably need to make sure that they're staying kind of within the scope of the category.
You know, it's brought to them. There's still a couple of them seem things they interpret differently than statutes in their code, so they were reminded pretty sternly this past time.
I'm glad you're there. All right. They're doing good work, but.
They are, no. College Board would like to be going on some other things too.
Okay.
Move on.
Okay. I missed the last meeting of the tourism marketing group, but I know our Main Street manager, Tiffany, is working on a small business Saturday campaign, which is typically the Saturday after Thanksgiving. So I'll just keep you all posted. We're not meeting this week, but we'll resume the following week.
Trustee Brown?
The Sustainability Futures Commission met on November the 8th. Most of what they discussed you heard tonight in their presentation, so I won't repeat that. They were looking at a couple of things on the ongoing transit issues and Lions service. I think that as Toby mentioned also, they're working on updating the Sustainability Action Plan, and they hope to have that in a position to bring to the board by sometime in the first quarter of next year.
I don't have anything new to report. No HSAC meeting since last time, so.
PCDC, we had the presentation during the workshop related to the overlays, which has been ongoing work of the PCDC. And they also held a public hearing related to municipal code pertaining to neighborhood notifications for large accessory buildings compared with small accessory buildings, two-story, etc. I think that finally has gotten to the point of clarity.
All right. I don't have anything to report. I did want to remind the clerk, I don't think we have executive session paperwork in front of us.
We're going to take a break, aren't we?
Okay. Certainly are. Do you have a summary of action items you'd like to review?
So we need to fix the sanitation on the
resolution for the budget.
resolution for the budget. We're going to continue the 1046 to a workshop on the 3rd and back to the board on the 17th. The date certain there on the 17th. I've got with 1042, we're going to do the $4, and then we're going to do the analysis and have it to the board in the first quarter. And that's all I got written down that I had made yellow. Did you have different ones?
Just watching the Kershey contract closely.
Oh, yeah, I missed that one,
For
didn't I?
overruns.
I didn't make it yellow.
And I only had one other one, I think. Oh, they were from the workshop.
Oh, shared data with UEB, Aaron and Jim.
Oh, yeah. I already talked to Jim Friday.
Okay, okay, thank you.
Yeah. And then, it really wasn't a directive, but I will be following up with Mr. Freisig about his request. I did go outside with him afterwards to let him know I was gonna be out of the office the rest of the week, so not to expect to talk to me till next Monday or Tuesday. And he's okay with that as long as, you know, I'll work with him on that 14-day notice, which my understanding from the board is, they wanted to give him a little more time than that, to at least talk with us, so I'll be doing that.
Okay, should we take a short break? So you can go for the paperwork?
Oh, but.
So moved.
Huh? Oh, she needs to read it in now, doesn't she?
No, we're just gonna take a break for a minute.
You just go take a break.
Okay, I can read, I could probably go off of
Yeah, I was
this.
gonna say, you probably
Can
have.
you go off of this?
You go ahead,
Yeah.
Deb, find
You
it.
can start us off anyway.
Oh,
Yeah.
and then we'll.
Yeah, right.
I move to go into executive session pursuant to CRS sections 246402-4A, 246402-4E, and 246402-4B for the purpose of discussing the possible purchase, acquisition, transfer, or sale of a real property interest, determining positions relative to matters that may be subject to negotiations, developing strategy for negotiations, and instructing negotiators, and for legal advice from attorneys representing the town regarding real property interest in the eastern corridor, paren, or 651 Ute Highway, close paren, and within the town limits. And to adjourn at the end of executive session.
Is there a second?
I'll second.
Any further discussion? All right, I'll call for the vote. All right, we're in executive session, so she comes back.
Shut it off?
Yeah, shut it off.
Okay.